Hello, everyone. I'm Malika Bilal.
And I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin. Welcome to our special election night collaboration between our two Al Jazeera teams on a very big night in the United States.
That's right. The congressional midterm elections are generally seen as a report card for the president of the day. And with Donald Trump in power and an unusually high turnout predicted, that may be more true than ever before. Immigration, women's rights, the economy, and bitter disputes over Trump decisions, such as nominating arch-conservative Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, will play on voters' minds as they cast their ballots for all 435 seats in the House of Representatives, 35 of the 100 seats in the Senate, and 39 state and territorial governorships.
The results, and this is definitely not an exaggeration to say, could really be epic, and it could change the course of U.S. politics for years to come. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the streamer AJ+, we're live on YouTube and Facebook right now, and we'll be bringing you results, but we'll also be focusing, as always, on the human stories beyond all those statistics and the polls that people always say don't matter. We're going to be spotlighting the people who are most affected.
Our producers will be standing by on the AJE YouTube channel and the AJ Plus Facebook page to chat to you and bring your comments and your questions to our guests throughout the evening. And of course, we can't do this alone. Ahmed and I, we could try. It wouldn't be very fun. So with us on set for our whole broadcast, Rena Shaw, a Republican strategist and consultant. She's co-founder of the Women's Public Leadership Network and partner at Red Ford Strategies. Next to her, Brad Jenkins, a Democratic strategist. He's also executive producer of Funny or Die and former associate director of the White House Office of Public Engagement under President Obama. Brad and Rena will be with us for the next 3 hours or so.
First, to help us kick things off here in studio with us is Rob Reynolds, an Al Jazeera English senior correspondent. He's here to break down everything we've seen today and perhaps give us some insights on what we can expect tonight as results start rolling in. And obviously, Rob, great to have you here. Results are rolling in already. We've already seen the first Muslim woman ever elected to Congress in Michigan, Rashida Tlaib. Lots of different notes here. But what I want to start with in terms of framing this, I mean, usually during the midterm elections, as many of us know, the party in power suffers from a lack of enthusiasm. Do you think that's going to happen, and what should we be focusing on?
Well, there's certainly a lot of enthusiasm on both sides. We see that with 35 million people voting early. We see that with lines outside polling places today that stretch for blocks. So there is a lot of engagement on both sides, and I think that obviously this is seen as a referendum on President Trump by both sides. And the fact is that the talk about, I mean, at this hour, at this very moment, Ahmed, the talk about a blue wave, it doesn't look like a tsunami at this point. It looks more like something you wouldn't really want to surf on.
Right.
So Rob said at this moment, and so with that, of course, as you're watching this riveting discussion we're going to bring you here, I know you still want to be glued to the results as they come in. So we are going to help you with that. In the bottom corner of your screen, you will see the live feed from Al Jazeera English News, and there you will see the results come in all throughout our program. Of course, if there is big breaking news, we will go to it in a bigger screen, but we, of course, will be here to give you some context and some social online about what's happening. So, of course, stay tuned for the next couple hours we have here. I wanted to bring our community in on this because we have to remember, of course, there is an international audience for this. So one person writing us from outside of the United States says, the significance of the U.S. midterms, they're a big test for Donald Trump. So, Brad, I will give this one to you because midterm elections seem like a very local type story, but they're not.
No, I mean, I think Ahmed put it correctly. It's epic. I mean, this is everything. This is not just the federal, this is the state. This is not just the state, this is the local state legislative races as well. And so we're going to see a lot. It's a lot of information for us to consume in the next 3 or so hours. I disagree. I think that, look, depending on your definition of what a blue wave is, Democrats, not a tsunami, exactly. I'm not an oceanologist, so I can't really break it down. But,
Rob is from LA, I just want to add. It's in California.
There aren't a lot of tsunamis in New Jersey, just to be clear.
But we digress. Sorry, that was my fault. Carry on.
But no, everything's at stake. I mean, every issue that you care about is at stake in this election. If you care about making sure that Donald Trump has checks and balances, that his agenda does not go on unabated, this election matters. If you care about your state, if you care about minimum wage and health care, this election matters. If you care about felon enfranchisement, which just happened in Florida. This election matters. So I'm excited about tonight because I love what you guys do, which is really dig into the human side of these stories.
Right.
And figure out what really is happening in each of these elections.
Well, with that in mind, I'm curious. I mean, Rob said something interesting, that both Democrats and Republicans see this as a referendum on Trump. I think Trump, more than anybody, sees this as a referendum on Trump, and he keeps telling us that over and over again. But since 1946, back to the earlier point, the average midterm loss for a president's party is 25 years. Do you think Republicans who are running see this as a referendum on Trump or want it to be a referendum on Trump?
I mean, they don't want that because they know how hard that makes it, right?
But he's the leader of their party.
Yeah. Listen, let's remember who he really is. He's a liberal from New York and was for many, many years. He's not a real Republican, and I'm part of that faction of the Republican Party that said that for a long time. From the moment he came down the golden escalator, it was a sense of like, is this a guy who's sort of hijacking the party for his own benefit? Yeah, because he's done it in the past when he's run. So look, I mean, in general, a lot of Republicans thought this was something could never come to fruition, especially when you had such a stacked field of, very qualified candidates. And he took it because Americans wanted change. They wanted something different. It was the same type of feeling when they elected Barack Obama. Do something different for me for Washington. What was different this time is the people who put their trust in a guy who had gilded gold everything. It was like, I would just break it down to this. He's made it very difficult for Republicans because of the divisive rhetoric. White suburban, college-educated women are like, no way, man.
Do you think he's addicted to the fear-mongering? Because if you look at the economic indicators, I mean, it's kind of odd. Like, he's doing really well in terms of the economy. And, the adage is that it's the economy, stupid. And his economy, I mean, he's really kind of killing it. I remember 4 million jobs created since 2016, more Americans employed than ever recorded. Growth is 4.2%. I mean, that's things you don't...
They're touting that.
Rob?
That's not what Trump is talking about.
Why not?
He's talking about this bedraggled column of footsore migrants making their way slowly through Mexico. And it is an explicitly... I mean, let's be honest, there's a racial element to all of this, and we should be really honest about that, I think, that the kind of racial dog whistles, as it's called in the past, have become like blowhorns. Yeah. So to focus, as you say, in spite of all of the economic good news that's out there, to focus on a bunch of brown people who are coming to the border, and not to mention all of the other things that have happened with Andrew Gillum, with Stacey Abrams, the gubernatorial candidates. There is a strong and rather ugly element to all of this.
So you mentioned dog whistles. I want to lay those out exactly, especially because we got this from Miss Halla here on Twitter. She says, one of the things she's noticed this election, rhetoric in this nation. What happened to my America? Now, Rena, you mentioned rhetoric. You mentioned the dog whistles. Talk to us exactly about what we mean here.
Well, when you talk about dog whistles, you have this whistle for a dog, right? And you can't hear it because it's pitched at a frequency below that or above that. I'm not sure which of the human ear. But when you talk about things like states' rights, or when, for example, Ronald Reagan, I'm going back a little ways here, but when he started his presidential campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, in a place where 3 civil rights workers were murdered during the civil rights era, he didn't need to say anything overtly racial because people got the message. Now it's a little more, when you see, for example, the gubernatorial candidate, Republican gubernatorial candidate in Florida, Ron DeSantis, was running against a black man, the mayor of Tallahassee, Andrew Gillum, and one of the first things he said was, "We can't monkey this up." Now, I've actually never heard that phrase before. You can't mess this up. We can't, muddle this up. But now that's above the level of dog whistle. I mean, that's within human hearing, right?
Is this desperation? I mean, earlier you outlined...
No, it works. It works.
But it's worked in the past. The question is, will it work now, and will it work in the future? The reason I say that is, I mean, I think we can all agree one of the reasons Trump got elected was there was a lot of racial resentment after Obama and a lot of economic anxiety. But he's killing it at the economy, relatively speaking, to use a word he might use, kill, sorry, apologize. But I guess I'm in Trump mode. But, you said he's obsessed with talking about brown people or any darker skin color, shade, hue. But unemployment is at historic lows, again, for all demographics, for brown and less brown and more brown and black.
This is something that President Trump mentions whenever he holds a rally, but it's not what he's emotional
Why?
about.
Because it works? Fear-mongering always works?
Fear-mongering doesn't always work. I mean, let's go back even further than Ronald Reagan to Franklin Roosevelt, who in 1941 said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Now, the only thing that Donald Trump is really offering people is fear.
And today, of course, we have to fear invasions, quote unquote, there. Brad, you've been quiet for a little bit. What do you make of this conversation about rhetoric and dog whistles?
I mean, the sad thing is, and I hate to agree, but fear works. And what Trump has done, I mean, look, he's running the playbook that he ran in 2016. He's playing to a base. These elections are about how do you fire up people to get out there, stand in line for 2 hours and vote. And what Donald Trump is doing, particularly on these Senate races, because look, the playing field for Democrats is not pretty when it comes to the Senate. It was never going to be easy. These are states, by and large, that skew very Republican, 10 to 15 point swing to Republican. So that's what Donald Trump did. He went to these states. He played to the base. And, as much as economic, to your point, I agree, as much as job numbers sound good, there's a difference between the economy's doing good, Trump is doing a good job, and these terrorists, migrants at the border are going to come and rape and murder my children if we don't elect a Republican.
But what's interesting is I just came back from Tennessee, rural Tennessee, Jamestown, Tennessee, somewhere nobody here has heard of, I'm sure, because even people in Knoxville and Nashville didn't know where I was going when I got there. So, one thing that stood out to me is we asked people about the fear-mongering. And of course, I came across racist people or people with racist views. And what I also came across was people who were still disillusioned. And they were disillusioned with not only, because they weren't disillusioned with the economy, but their perception of their role in America, that they had been forgotten, not just by the previous administrations, but by President Trump too. Things haven't gotten that much better, even if some of the economic indicators show that job growths in Tennessee the first 100 days of Trump's administration was through the roof. And what I'm getting at, and this is why I keep asking the same question over and over, not just because I'm tired, is I don't know that it does work as well as it used to.
Sure.
Because there were, and hopefully we can play one of those shots later on for you guys, but there were some people there who told me, I think he should shut up.
Yeah.
I didn't vote Democrat or Republican, I voted third party. They even started talking about Bernie Sanders and his appeal for universal health care. I mean, this is in rural Tennessee. So what are your thoughts? I mean, do you think it's going to work for sure?
What's going to work?
Fear-mongering.
Fear-mongering, absolutely, because that's what Trump thrives on, right? It's when people are scared, they're motivated to do something, they're compelled to action. And when women go to the polls in particular, they vote with national security and the economy front of mind. And let's not make any mistake, this whole caravan issue, it's about national security. He's put it at the center again, because while these numbers all sound good, the economy just isn't sexy to some people, especially when you're talking to a lower, a crowd that's probably part of the lower rungs of the socioeconomic situation in this country. They are folks that kind of are like, everything's great, but my life hasn't changed, right? But when you talk national security events, and I mean, suddenly you've got them listening, right?
Also, Rena, the one thing, really, the one major thing that was passed in the first 2 years of Trump's administration was the tax cuts.
Sure.
And they have flopped.
Absolutely.
People are not.
Republicans don't want to admit that.
Even the Republicans are not talking about the tax cuts because the ordinary people see this as something for the wealthy. So there's nothing to run on there.
You have to do something that's bigger and larger. And when you talk national security, suddenly the image of 9/11 is evoked in the minds of just every American, because we're not that far away from that. And the idea of brown people, whether they come from Saudi Arabia or from South America and whether they're taking your jobs or blowing up your buildings, that does something to white America, because this country is a Judeo-Christian country, founded on Judeo-Christian
That's right.
principles, but it's different now. It's changing.
So Rena Shaw, I'm going to pause you there. I want our audience to respond to what Rena said. Tweet us, be on Facebook, be on YouTube. We're going to pause our conversation right here. Rob, we have to leave it there with you, but we will be back. He'll be back with us at the end of the night to wrap it all up. For now, we have to pause. We're going to go to Al Jazeera English News so you can see what's going on right now. And of course, keep sending us your comments.
You know, our country really needed to go in a different direction, you know, and I like so many of the things that he has to say, you know, like in terms of immigration, you know, things in terms of border security, things that just affect the everyday American, you know.
I mean, I'm for legal immigration, and I know a lot of people recently that have immigrated here, and you know, they waited in line, and I just think that if you're going to come here, you should come here legally.
We need to vote in large numbers because our future is important, you know, as well as everybody else's. And the other brown people too, the immigrants in Mexico and Central and South America. This voting session is really important to millions of people.
I would say that, you know, us young people, that, you know, we're like what makes this country so great. You know, we are involved, we're fighting on gun violence, we're fighting about climate change, and that's what's really important, that us as youth in this country, we're civically engaged and we care.
Well, continuing on that conversation of race, Black women are talking politics and taking politics of the southern state of Alabama by storm. Alabama is one of the most unequal states for women in the country, with one of the highest wage gaps, lowest incomes, and lowest unemployment rates for women. Women hold only 14% of state legislature seats, and this year, at least 70 Black women are changing that. They're running for political office, more than any other state. Now, this is Kara's story.
I believe it, that women, Black women, are going to save the soul of Alabama, and I'm sticking with it. The reason that I decided to run for Public Service Commission Place 1 was actually during the drive back and forth across the state of Alabama and seeing the conditions of our people and talking to people, listening to them, understanding the needs. They would talk to me about, you know, their livelihood in rural Alabama, and that they had to often choose between buying groceries and paying their utilities. That's not right.
So we know this year's U.S. midterm elections are already historic, with a record number of women, Native Americans, and Arab and Muslim candidates running for office and winning in their primaries. We'll delve into each of those record-breaking wins tonight, but first, a look at #WomenRun2018. I'll take a look at my screen here. It was such a great exercise to draw the women of this year's Senate races, writes illustrator May Sonder on Instagram using that hashtag. She also writes, "Now go vote." Of course, voting has closed for now, but you can see that on Instagram. Over here on Twitter, Indivisible Northville links today's events to the Women's March following the election of Donald Trump. The Women's March wasn't just a protest, it was the start of something new. And now we have a different kind of Women's March on Washington. So many qualified, awesome women running for office. One of those women in particular is inspiring much of the buzz online with the specific hashtag Black Women Lead. California Democratic Senator Kamala Harris tweets, "It's 2018. Our nation still hasn't had a Black woman governor. Help make history for Stacey Abrams." Now, one of the most closely watched races in the country is in the state of Georgia, where Stacey Abrams could become the first Black woman ever elected governor in the U.S. Take a look.
We are here to ensure that everyone who calls Georgia home has the freedom and opportunity to thrive, to live their very best lives.
Imagine being a 7 or 8-year-old who has to stand in front of the graves of slaves and be told to celebrate the man who put them there.
going to celebrate as a black woman. I am just so overwhelmed and excited. So I'm going to bask in all of my black girl magic that I know that black women lead.
Joining us from Atlanta at Stacey Abrams' party is AJ Plus senior correspondent Francesca Fiorentini. Francesca, so good to see you. Obviously, it's been already a night of firsts for women in general. Ayanna Pressley, officially the first black woman from Massachusetts elected to U.S. Congress. We also have Rashida Tlaib, the first Palestinian American and first Muslim woman ever elected to Congress. How is it playing out there in Georgia in terms of the woman vote?
Right, so what we may be able to add to that first list tonight here in Atlanta, where everyone is awaiting the results of the election gubernatorial race between Secretary of State Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams. We are in the Working People's Watch Party. This is not the official watch party. The official watch party is a few floors up, but this specifically is a grouping of unions, labor activists, and immigrant rights activists, people who have been supporting Stacey Abrams from the grassroots. So the air here is excitement, but also there's an acknowledgement that we might not know the results for another couple hours, and there actually might be a runoff. Remember that if neither Kemp nor Abrams gets at least 50% of the vote, there will be a runoff. There is a libertarian candidate in the mix here, and that might be a spoiler maybe in Abrams' favor. But there's music playing, there's people hanging out, and I want to give you sort of a sense of everything.
Yeah,
Can I do that?
Yeah, what's the vibe? Show us.
Can I take you on a little mini tour?
Yeah, what's the vibe? I don't know if you could hear me, but I said yeah, but I'll say it again.
The vibe is good. The vibe is good. I just want to show it to you. So this is the Stacey Abrams Working People's Watch Party, and people are waiting, watching CNN and MSNBC, getting their drink on a little bit.
Why not? Why not?
Why not? Calm the nerves a little bit. No, but it's generally, again, the official watch party is a few floors up, and there's a lot of folks there, but this is specifically a lot of people of color, young people, immigrant rights organization, LGBTQ rights organization, and labor unions. Let's go talk to them.
Great. Seems like pretty crowded, even if it's not the official watch party there.
It is pretty crowded. So here we have Tamara and Charles, and they're with the Painters and Allied Trades Union here in Georgia. So tell me, what have you been doing to build for this election, and how was today, Tamara?
Well, actually, it's Tamara.
Tamara.
No worries. So we've been working really hard down here in Atlanta around this election. It hasn't just been starting this year. You know, the foundation of building to win something like the governorship for Stacey Abrams takes like a lot of work and building a base. And so we've been really dedicating ourselves to reaching to our membership as well as future members to know about how important it is to vote for someone who believes in the values that we believe in.
And what are some of those specific platform points that Stacey Abrams holds that maybe you haven't seen in a governor here in Georgia, Charles?
Well, there's a lot of stuff as far as bringing people together, you know, and working across the aisle. And that's what I think that we really got to have is some governor that will take and work across the aisle, and get bills that will actually help the working people. People like those who are getting wages stolen. You know, the wage theft is a big issue for us here in District Council 77 because a lot of workers are getting their pay stolen. And we want to represent everybody. We want to try to help everybody. And I think that Stacey will be able to take and do that by getting bills established and passed that will help all of us.
No, what is the sense on the ground knowing that Stacey is going up against Brian Kemp, who's the current Secretary of State, and we know that there has been voter suppression. In fact, Kemp was sued and lost the lawsuit actually, and has to the 53,000 people who were denied registration only a couple days ago were allowed to register. But what has been the sense at the polls here? Have you been watching? What are the lines like?
You know, people are fighters. You know, you're in the South, right? This is nothing new for people. Suppressing the black and brown vote is a history, right, in the South and in this country. And so Georgians have been fighting for this moment. So on the ground, and talking to voters, to everyday people, they know what they're up against. They know that, you know, the forces that be don't always want us to win, but that's not about him. It's about us. It's about working people coming together in a coalition of black and brown folks, you know, immigrants, Americans, all of us coming together and saying that regardless of who tries to stop us, we have a future together and we're going to build it together.
So in some ways, the groundwork has already been laid for, let's say, if Abrams does not win. What are the next steps, Charles, if Stacey does not win tonight?
Well, I think that she has laid the groundwork as far as, you know, building the community groups together, the unions together to actually move the future for the South. And here in Atlanta, Georgia, I think that this is just a momentum that's going to keep on going. Whether she win or lose tonight, the momentum is picking up, and the momentum is going to take and I think be a future.
How are you, in terms of your membership, and how are people responding to the fact that Kemp has been suppressing some of the vote and is actually the current Secretary of State? This is the man in charge of overseeing free and fair elections. What happens if he wins? Would your union, let's say, sue or demand a recount, or what are the steps?
Well, the steps as far as if she wins nationally, we're going to be really happy and be looking forward to calling her our next governor and working with her to get these bills passed that will help all working people, all the people here in Georgia. And if it's a recount, then, we kind of suspect that, that there's been issues as far as suppressing the vote, him. I think, though, that when you look at that, it's making a determination from the members to really want to, strive ahead and try to take and make sure their vote's counted, make sure that their vote is going to be counted no matter what kind of difficulties that they have to go through.
So this is the Working People's Watch Party. This is not the official watch party, not that you guys aren't in solidarity with them as well. But so what are the issues that working class Georgians are facing?
We are in a place now, if you look at a place like Atlanta where you have rising inequality, some of the highest inequality in the nation, working Georgians are trying to live here and work here, right? Affordable housing, good schools. We have a growing black and brown community that comes from all over the world, and that we want to be a state that's welcoming to all working families. So if we can build the country and we can build the state and we can pick the cotton and pick the fruits and all the things that you can live off of, we should be able to live here safe, right? That's for all Georgians, regardless of where you come from or what you look like. So at the heart of it is about being seen and knowing that we belong here and that we fought to stay here and that we want to be here regardless of who wins, right? So if Abrams wins, that's great. She's an ally, but we're still going to have to push her, and that's okay, because that's the fight, right?
Thank you so much, Tamara and Charles. Ahmed, back to you all in studio.
Thank you, Francesca. Now, I wanted to bring in a few comments from online. This one, Stacey Abrams Stan account. That means they're a huge fan. Georgia's voting doesn't end until 10. If y'all don't chill. So that is a reminder there that it is only 9:40 p.m. It is not, the polls have not yet closed. So that, of course, means we do not know anything for certain. Another comment we got here. This one is live to the stream and AJ Plus on YouTube. Christopher says Abrams will not win. She didn't have a plan for black folks. She talks about immigration and gay rights, but not about the black communities. So just one comment there. But Brad, you heard what Francesca's guest there said at the non-official watch party. What do you make of this race? And then broaden it out a little bit more to Women Run 2018.
Yeah. Well, I disagree with that last Twitter comment. I'm looking here at the exit polls. Turnout among non-white voters looks like it might hit a record in Georgia. 40% turnout among non-white voters, including 30% turnout among black voters. she's doing something right. So,
well, you know, she had Oprah on her side.
She did have Oprah on her side.
Oprah was going door to door,
This is true.
knocking on people's doors.
Can't underestimate Oprah.
Can't underestimate Oprah.
Yes,
the Oprah
exactly.
vote is big. The Oprah bump helped Obama. It helped Stacey here.
Yeah.
No, look, I mean, I think that this was a huge, this is a historic election, even if she doesn't, not able to pull it out here. I think it will likely be a runoff looking at these numbers because I don't think either candidate's going to hit 50%. Georgia has a trifecta. Georgia has a governor Republican, Republicans that run the state Senate, state House. This is a southern state.
Such a big deal. Such
And
a
the
red
fact
state,
that Stacey ran a campaign unapologetically progressive, unapologetically herself. This is not someone who tacked to the middle. This is not someone who tried to, try to placate certain parts of the party. She ran as who she was, and I think that I agree. I think it's a larger message about women this cycle because the record number of women who signed up to vote. Emily's list had something like a 300% uptick in people signing up to vote this cycle, and they're winning. And that's the thing. They're resonating. They're winning.
You know what it kind of reminds me of? Sorry, I don't mean to interject.
No, sure.
You can interrupt me all you want. She does it all the time. Otherwise, we're all in trouble. But no, in all seriousness, it reminds me of the Tea Party movement.
Yeah.
How right when Obama got elected, there was a trigger. We saw that people were mobilizing and organizing online, and whether it was explicitly women or not, I remember early on seeing when Trump was elected, women leading a lot of the quote unquote resistance. And I'm just curious, even before he was inaugurated. And when you look at those Georgia numbers, I mean, Ayman Mohyeddin, who used to work for this network, now he works for MSNBC, he was tweeting about how a lot of the polling places like Georgia didn't accept, I didn't know this, federal help in protecting its election system. There were all sorts of hacks. I mean, what do you think this signifies as a Republican looking at the party historically and moving forward? It seemed as if there were many allegations that it was a policy or a principle to limit the amount of women or women of color who vote in Georgia.
Just the amount of people of color, I think.
Right.
Voter suppression has been such a hot topic in this race. But going back at, I got to tell you where I'm at personally. I'm with former President Jimmy Carter, who wrote an op-ed about how Kemp should have recused himself from this position of Secretary of State. Free and fair election.
Just to pause a little. A comma there for our audience that doesn't know, Secretary of State, but also running against Stacey Abrams here. We're going to talk about that a little bit later when we talk about voter suppression. But please.
So being in charge of the election that you were a candidate in. I mean, so I had a friend in Georgia tell me, well, what's the big deal? Because other Secretary of States have done this. And I'm like, but not at this level. There have been every week there's something new that Kemp is doing. And it's just become so utterly obvious that this guy is worried about people of color turning out to vote for a woman of color. And you just got to call a spade sometimes. But one of the Republican criticisms I've heard that I was also kind of had my eyebrow up. She flies out of state a lot. She holds fundraisers in San Francisco. That's one of the criticisms. That's one of the gotcha things they're doing on the ground there. They're getting her for being somebody that's courting a lot of out-of-state money. But women have a hard time getting checks that are max out checks, $2,700 US. What are you going to do as a female candidate? I talk to female candidates about that all the time.
Really?
What are we going to do when you need a check that is the max, but people are not willing to write those to women? So you got to go wherever the money is. That is what our system calls for. It's tough for women, though.
I know Francesca is standing by with another guest for us, and she is at the unofficial watch party for Stacey Abrams in Georgia. Francesca?
It's very exciting. A lot of young people. Again, this is the Working People's Watch Party, right below the official watch party. And I'm here with Adelina, who is with Mi Gente, an immigrant rights organization. And Adelina, you were out at the polls today, and I understand it was difficult for many counties to vote. Tell me some of the barriers that people encountered today.
Well, in particular, long lines, not enough polling places. Sometimes when people arrive to the polling place, their name is not on the list. And we are having constant issues with that. And many reports we have received, and long lines, and even some of the polling places, they have extended their hours beyond 7, 8, 9 o'clock until everybody is able to vote.
Right, even just up until an hour ago, there were people in line. And if they were in line at 7, they could
It's
still
more about
vote.
here. It's like really it's
Absolutely. There are
noisy
two
here, yeah.
counties in particular, which is the Gwinnett and Fulton County, that they have extended their hours because, well, many problems in the process, not having enough places for people to vote, and sometimes they are not, the computers are down. But I think that the most important for us is people is standing in line, waiting for the turn, and they are there still.
What about the Latino community here in Georgia? I understand that a couple of counties specifically had difficulty, who had difficulty voting were heavily Latino. How's the Latino vote been? We know that this has been an incredible turnout for people of color.
Absolutely, more than 300,000 people we have been contacting, and one of the problems that we have seen is when they go into the polling place, their names are not matching the registration. That has been a problem, and has been a problem since like 1 month ago.
This is that exact match stipulation that Brian Kemp is overseeing that was actually voted illegal or deemed illegal just a couple of days ago, right? That purged 53,000 people. Let me ask you about Stacey Abrams, turning to the positive and why you're here and why you've organized for Stacey Abrams. Why are immigrant rights groups like Mi Gente supporting someone like Abrams?
Because she's a progressive candidate. As well, she has been able to understand what is the issue with immigration in particular. We know that we know her career into the political arena and very engaged in human rights, civil rights. And that's the reason we believe that that's the best candidate to support the Latino community and to solve as well issues on immigrants here in the state.
What would it mean for the immigrant community, the Latino community in Georgia to have someone like Stacey Abrams in a time of Donald Trump?
Yep, this could be a good win for everybody, and we do believe that even if we win or lose, the Latino community has won already. This has been the first attempt to reach Latinos in the state of Georgia, and in the primaries already we increased the 3% of voting in primaries. Now we are expecting that those numbers to rise, and we believe that we will continue in face of Trump. It's kind of challenging. It's a way to defy as well all the hate politics and hatred climate around the state.
Sure. The politics of fear. Thank you so much, Adelina. Thanks for your time, and good luck tonight.
Thank you.
And as we know, and Ahmed and you all in studio, you guys know that the turnout here has been insane, right? Early voters between the ages of 19 and 28 surged by, I think, 400 and like almost 500%, right? And early voters, 2 million early voters, half of those were voters of color. So everyone is very galvanized. Again, there's a nervous energy, but Madonna's playing in the background.
Hey, if Madonna's playing in the background, then I guess there's reason to celebrate. But I will spare you by not singing the rest of the lyrics.
It's actually Cyndi Lauper, but I'm just gonna.
Oh, is it the song?
I won't sing "Girls Just Want to Have Fun."
Oh, right. Well, all girls I know are down to have fun, whether they're sad about election night or not. But that was the worst segue in the world. But the point is that I would like to bring it to kind of the broader look. Obviously, we heard from Francesca what's happening in Georgia, but not far away from Georgia. I was in Tennessee, as I mentioned, and you know. One thing that I think I remember from the 2016 election is a lot of my friends, especially women in my life, were shocked by the fact that so many white women voted for Trump, right? So this time, you don't think so?
I'm not shocked. I knew they were going for him. Sorry.
She literally just went,
saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, but in all seriousness, the reason I bring it up is because I asked a lot of these women who I encountered in rural Tennessee whether the fear-mongering turns them off. Whether the Kavanaugh stuff and all these different things that have been happening, the ante has been raised repeatedly, relentlessly almost, when it comes to race and women and things that you might think that a mother or women in general would be offended by. And there was something interesting that she said beyond the fact that she seemed to suggest that healthcare was more important than anything else. Let's take a look at some of what she said. He talks about Mexican criminals. He talks about terrorists. He talks about grabbing women by the When he says all those things, what do you think?
I think he needs to keep his mouth shut too. I mean, it'd be just the same as they'd say, well, white women, or
same.
or terrorists and whatever. You can't trust them or whatever, which I've been told that
People
too.
do say you can't trust women.
Right. So yeah, I take offense to that because I feel like I'm very trustworthy.
I mean, she takes offense to that because she's a woman and she feels like she's trustworthy, which is why I take offense to the fact that Trump says Middle Eastern, no plural, Middle Eastern people are just coming to get us. But, her making that connection between the fear-mongering and what it would be like if I were to say white women, do you think this midterm election, which is being framed as essentially a presidential election, a referendum on Trump, do you think white women are going to come and support the Republican Party after everything that we've seen here in Washington, D.C. in terms of the resistance and protests?
I mean, GOP leadership's been shaking in their britches for a reason this whole past week because, as I think I said earlier, this is a white, college-educated suburban woman that's a nightmare. She likes pro-business, the pro-growth economic policies of the GOP. She's good with that. She's not good with the divisive rhetoric, the stuff that she cannot explain to a young son or a young daughter because she's trying to raise them up differently. Meanwhile, the president's at all the rallies talking about, I like a guy that can body slam people,
So what do most women do? They vote Republican down the ticket?
Well, they do what I did and they vote Libertarian.
That's actually what Melissa Hicks, that chicken farmer, told me. She didn't vote Democrat or Republican.
I didn't. I'm frustrated with both parties.
Right.
I really am. I mean, I've been frustrated with Democrats for a very long time, and I was no Obama hater. Never gave him my vote, kind of like silent respect, because, to me, he was the American dream, coming from a divorced family and getting to an Ivy League and just becoming what he became. I like serious respect, but never really liked him. Just never really liked Obama. And then I worked in the halls of Congress and just really didn't like his policies. But again, it wasn't, I try to always look past like what's getting to me. And it wasn't the skin color. It was just, why can't we talk about what we just disagree about? Sometimes our approach to government and how it helps us and betters our lives is just really fundamentally different. But where we've gotten to is a place where all we do is talk about the tensions of being a white working man who's lost his job and, a white woman that's got this going on, and then being a black woman and this and that. And I'm brown and I'm in the middle of it all. So it's like really hard for me sometimes. I imagine it is sometimes for you too, just being, stereotyped as something.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, I think that and there's recent studies that just came out on how racialized the country became after Obama. And this had nothing to do with Barack Obama's policies. This had to do with, unfortunately, propaganda like Fox News that really racialized the president and his policies. And you look at particularly the white working class, non-college educated voters. Before Obama, they didn't really know which party really cared more or benefited more communities of color. They're like, maybe Republicans do it, maybe Democrats do it. That swing went literally 180. And so what you're finding now is what happened in 2016 is that was an election about race. As much as Hillary Clinton was trying to break that glass ceiling, race trumped gender. And you look at that, particularly with white suburban women who voted for Donald Trump. What you're seeing here, just looking at these early results in the suburban districts where Democrats are winning tonight, and now if you look at all these forecasts, things are looking good for Democrats in the House. Why? Because white suburban women are now having a problem with this.
So gender trumped race this midterm.
It did, and I think, but I think it's two things. I think it's one, I think that there's a lot of regret, in my opinion. Again, a lot of this is anecdotal, but you're seeing it in polling. You're also seeing it, obviously, in these results. And two, Trump isn't talking about the things that moms actually care about. Right? Moms care about health care. Moms care about making sure their kids have a good education, can get to college. He's talking about things that, again, moms in these districts, in Colorado, in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, they don't care about. They don't care about these migrant. Yes,
I've heard
exactly.
that
This migrant
so
caravan.
So, Brad, Rena, interesting points. If you are a mom, if you are a woman and not a mom, we want to hear from you as well. I want to read two comments here about the Women Run 2018 before we wrap this segment. Pure Hermit on YouTube says, Donald Trump Puerto Rico, mass shootings, female voices have reacted, have united, especially the younger generation's reactions. They want to engage in real change. Another person coming to us on Twitter, Natasha, says the last 2 years have been one big watershed moment, the silver lining of the 2016 election. The Me Too movement, the Kavanaugh hearings, the boasting of sexual assault by the president. It's clear that women are ready to fight back in our homes, our workplaces, and our government. If you agree with that or disagree, we want to hear from you. A big thank you, of course, to Francesca, who we heard from earlier. We'll be keeping an eye on Georgia and that race with Stacey Abrams. Now, have a listen right now to Tahira Amatul Wadud.
My name is attorney Tahira Amatul Wadud, and I ran for Congress in Massachusetts' 1st Congressional District in the Democratic primary on September 4th. While I did not secure an electoral victory, I'm very excited for the hundreds of races happening throughout the nation where candidates are running in unprecedented numbers to represent the people of our community. We have women, people of color, people running on progressive and bold agendas. Tonight is going to be an exciting night to watch those results come in.
So here's a not so fun fact. There's never been a Native American congresswoman in the U.S. Well, that could change tonight, as could the overall representation of Native Americans in politics. Have a look here at my laptop. Representation is something that Deb Haaland, Peggy Flanagan, Sharice Davids, and Paulette Jordan take seriously. Those are the pictures here on this Instagram picture. They are just 4 of more than 100 Indigenous politicians running for office. Now, aside from the candidates, though, online, voters are encouraging others to join them, and that's despite several obstacles against them. Ruth here on Twitter tweets early voting on the Standing Rock Sioux reservation in 2014 versus early voting on the Standing Rock Sioux reservation in 2018. You can see the graph here. It's up over 400%.
Wow.
And this is information you can see via 4 Directions Vote. Of course, we can also tweet that out for you. She writes, tell us again that we can't vote.
That's so encouraging. I mean, you know, you were saying earlier this is a Judeo-Christian nation.
Yeah.
A lot of people would argue used to belong to them. This is Deb Haaland in her own words.
I believe that we should have diversity in every level of government. And in Congress, there's not one person who looks like me. My name is Deb Haaland, and I am a Native American woman running for New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. There are so many Native women activists all over the country who have fought to ensure treaty rights, who have fought to ensure fishing rights, who have been on the protest line fighting for clean water, clean land, clean air. And I almost feel like everything has sort of culminated in 2018 where we feel that it's time to take a stand.
From Deb Haaland's party in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we're joined by AJ Plus producer Shreen Khan. Shreen, we hear rumors, we hear early reports that she has in fact won. What's happening? What's the mood like, and did she win?
So we're here with Deb's campaign in Albuquerque. Local polls are already projecting her as the winner. People are screaming. The mood is really excited. We actually have Deb's daughter, Soma, here with us for just a few minutes before she rushes on stage to actually pronounce Deb as the winner. So Soma, come here next to me. Tell me how you feel after campaigning for Deb for the last 18 months.
It feels pretty surreal, honestly. I can't say that I'm surprised, but of course it's still just, it's incredible. I'm so proud of my mom and all the hard work she's done. She's been on the phone doing, you know, she's a grassroots organizer and she's been doing that for herself for these past 18 months, and I couldn't be prouder.
Deb has inspired so many people, and I know she finds you as a huge source of inspiration too. Do you know what you're going to say on stage to lead?
Yeah, I wrote something up earlier today, and it made the whole staff cry already. So hopefully it's very sincere, and it's hard to put everything I feel about my mom onto one piece of paper, but I'm ready. I think I'm ready.
And is your mom ready to go to Congress?
She was born ready. She's always been ready. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Soma.
Thank you. Thank you.
She was born ready. That is good to hear that, Shireen. Thanks for bringing us that. Of course, we are going to stay with you and keep on what is happening there. But I want to bring in another guest, another stream guest as well. With us on Skype from Denver, Colorado, Simon Moya-Smith is a writer and reporter and a citizen of the Oglala Lakota Nation. He is the author of the forthcoming book, Your Spirit Animal is a Jackass. Welcome back to the stream. I like the little shrug there.
Yeah.
And I also can't wait to read that. I wanted to bring up this tweet we just got from Danelle, who says, back home in the Turtle Mountains, a record 5,000 plus people voted today. 3,300 voted in 2016. Hashtag stand and vote. Hashtag native vote. What does that say to you, Simon? What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, look what they try to do in North Dakota with voter suppression. When you tell natives...
Tell us. I don't know that our audience is all on the same page, so tell us what they tried to do in North Dakota.
So, yeah, in North Dakota, what they were trying to do is tell Native Americans they weren't allowed to vote unless their ID had a physical address, where a lot of the IDs on the reservations out there don't have physical addresses. So they were being turned away at the polls in 2014, and they were trying to do that again. But now you see this surge of indigenous people, and especially youth, who led a march today to their polling place to galvanize other natives so that we can be that voice, so that people can recognize that we're still here. Mm-hmm. And that's really important to know, is that Native Americans were the smallest racial minority in our ancestral land. So our voice can it has a huge influence on who's elected to Congress and who represents our state and who represents indigenous values.
And Simon, I'm curious, when you talk about indigenous values, it seems like she's promised to really focus on climate change, on promoting renewable energy. There's always been a very close connection between that native community in America and the land. It seems like women are winning across different demographics, whether Latinos or the first Muslim. Now we have two first Muslims. It seems Deb just, such an unprecedented kind of glass ceiling in of itself shattered. What do you think this means looking forward in terms of the trajectory of this country when it comes to policy and priority?
I think it's important to remember that Native American, there's never been a Native American woman elected to Congress, and I'm excited that Deb Haaland may be the first. If she is, that's amazing. We also have Sharice Davids out of Kansas. Mm-hmm. But we follow things like the 7-generation rule, right? You can't make a significant decision without considering 7 generations ahead of you. And right now we have too many men in Congress that can only see as far as their grandchildren can walk. So what's really imperative to us is to take care of the earth, to take care of the water, to take care of the youth, and to have this indigenous voice, the strong female indigenous voice, finally at Congress. I think you're going to see some significant changes.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to bring in this comment we got from YouTube, where our audience is watching this live. Jaggerhead writes, the Dakota Access Pipeline, something that we covered extensively here on the stream, was a precursor to the steamroll politics that people are voting in hope of changing tonight. So that's just one example of what this person says is bringing people out, or brought people out to the polls. I want to hear from a few other voters and share their perspectives with you, because earlier we talked to several indigenous voters about what matters to them. Have a listen.
A lot of my people don't have access to the voting location, don't have the access to the interpretation that they need when they need to go vote.
When I go out into my community, I hear people saying, well, my vote is not going to count. My one single vote here in the middle of the reservation, are they really counting my vote? Are they really capturing my voice?
Living in Oklahoma, we have a lot of issues dealing with sovereignty, the environment, health, education, and, our voices need to be heard with these subjects.
It's a pretty momentous time to see Native American communities combat and fight back and stand up.
So, Shireen, I don't even know what to say. The results are coming in so fast when it comes to women making, unprecedented accomplishments in this election. Not just Rashida Tlaib, as we've said, as well as Ilhan, the first Muslim Americans there. What's the mood like, and what does this mean to the people there? This is really a particularly special, I would say, victory for not just women, but for Native Americans, given the tragic history in this country.
Yes, absolutely. And I wanted to draw a little bit of a contrast from what Simon was saying in North Dakota with voter suppression. We're not seeing that here in New Mexico, where Native American communities are very fired up. They are not being suppressed with their votes. People are really united behind Deb. We were at the polls earlier today in Isleta Pueblo talking to people who were so excited to vote for Deb and who come out to vote every single election cycle. And this afternoon, I think it was 1:30 local time, there had already been more people in New Mexico that voted than the last midterm. So people here are so fired up. We were at a rally last night, and they're really excited to be represented by Deb, from someone whose pueblo is just 40 minutes from here. She's from Laguna Pueblo, and she's actually going to be giving her speech any moment now in the ballroom. So if you guys want to walk with us, we can head there and take Deb's speech.
Please, I would love that. We will check back in with you once you are there. Simon, I'm wondering, you're hearing all of that. What's your reaction?
It is amazing. Again, this is the first time a Native woman will be elected to Congress. And we're waiting to hear about Paulette Jordan to see if she will be elected the first Native governor. Now, not just female, the United States has never had a Native American governor, male or female. So we're seeing first this midterm election, and it's amazing, it's inspiring, because Native Americans, we've been counseled out of the conversation for far too long, whether that's in media, even in politics. But now we have our first Native American female congresswoman, Deb Haaland.
And I'm just curious, Brad, when you hear this, you were talking about women, the enthusiasm, the role they played in 2016, not just as voters, but now as candidates. I mean, this is obviously tied to Trump's rhetoric, but what is this about to you, this victory?
To be honest, I think this is the most underreported story, to be honest. I mean, I think everyone's been talking about the women vote, they've been talking about the youth vote, the Latino vote. What happened, I guess this is now how many years? 3 years ago at Standing Rock. It was a generational moment, and I got to meet some of these. These are kids. I mean, these aren't adults. These are 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, and what they were able to create there, I believe, was the start of this. I think the entire country watched. This was happening under the Obama administration. This wasn't a partisan issue, and they captured the attention of the country because, one, they stood up. Right? They stood up for their people, their community, and two, they were doing it against all odds, right?
And Deb was a big voice
100%.
When it comes to that issue.
That's
she was very tied to it.
That's right. And I think it comes down to, look, we talk about marginalized communities all the time. There's no other community that is more vulnerable, more marginalized, and more taken for granted than this community. And the fact that we have yet to have a member of Congress, it's ridiculous.
There have been 10,000, not one so far.
It's unbelievable.
10,000 members of Congress.
It's giving me, I'm getting goosebumps because this should have had done happen, right? The fact that this is happening and yet no one is reporting on it. I don't see any. Nothing against CNN with their 15 people on their panel. I don't think anyone's talking about the indigenous vote here.
Because they've been treated like second-class Americans for a really long time. And people don't understand the power of this demographic until they, it's a collective now. And there's a sense that, we matter. And because they can organize the way they did and make it something that wasn't hyper-partisan, I'm really proud of this group I've been a part of for a while, Vote Run Lead. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit. It's national. We are all about equipping women to run for office, and it's been great because a couple years ago, our team, I've been on the advisory board for about 4 years, our team decided to focus on Native American women, really, like putting out trainings for them. And I was in Minnesota this time last year, and we did a march down the streets of the Twin Cities. And recognizing their power.
Forgive me, I don't want to interrupt you, but we just got word, I don't know if it's confirmed, and obviously we're not calling shots, but Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee.
Right, exactly. Who was recently featured in coverage on Fault Lines. So go check out the latest Fault Lines documentary with, it's called The Church of Trump. There's an interesting segment with Marsha Blackburn in there as well. So do that. So just a little breaking news there. But Rena, you were saying?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Native American women, the fact that like nearly 40 of them were running this election cycle and it's like underreported, and I only see it in niche, places like, okay, Elle did a piece, Elle magazine. That's just wrong. I mean, obviously they have a long way to go, but it's a beautiful start. We have to start somewhere, and I think they get that.
And Carmel Barber agreeing with you, not just about Deb Haaland. I don't know, maybe this is about Marsha Blackburn, the Republican who won in Tennessee, of course. Hallelujah, go women, fight for Mother Earth. Your children and grandchildren, bless you all. So maybe 2018 really is the year of the woman.
And I will say before I throw to Shireen that, of course, it's not just niche outlets, the stream here. I got it on my laptop. Hashtag Native Vote 18. Can Native Americans change U.S. politics? We talked to Deb Haaland. This was in June 2018. If you have a chance, go see that episode because I learned a lot, and I think you might as well. But I want to throw to you now, Shireen. You are at the victory party for Deb Haaland. What are you hearing?
So we're here in the ballroom where Deb's expected to make her speech any minute now. You can see on stage there are New Mexico state flags and there are big projections on either side of me with the winners. Sharice Davids was just announced and everyone was cheering, which is so exciting. Deb was actually really active in Sharice's campaign. They were attending each other's, stumping and making sure to get the Indigenous vote out for all of the Indigenous candidates that were there. The senator for New Mexico was also called Martin Heinrich, who is a Democrat, who won handily over Gary Johnson, who you might remember from the 2016 race, who tried to run for president against Donald Trump as a libertarian. He actually served as governor here in New Mexico in the past, so he's kind of a household name here. People are really excited to hear from Deb, so you know, we're all just standing around, and we have a guest here that we want to ask some questions to. Hi, tell us what your name is and what brings you here.
I'm Jana Pfeiffer, and I'm here in support of Deb Haaland.
And what do you like about Deb?
She's just such an amazing woman. She's empowering a whole generation of an amazing generation of young girls. So I'm excited to be here. Yeah. Yes, I'm Navajo. Yes.
And did Deb come to the Navajo Nation in the campaign?
Yes, she sure did. Definitely.
What do you think this feels like for young girls that are growing up and get to see a congresswoman like Deb representing them?
It's so important for our young generation to see a relative, especially someone that we would consider our auntie, a strong, empowered women, to be in such a powerful position to really elevate our native tribes and our issues to a point where we can talk amongst the other senators, Congress, and bring native issues to light as well.
And have you ever come to an election watch party before I knew that?
No, this is actually my first time, all because Deb Haaland is here.
And would you say the same for other people your age?
Yes, for sure.
Shireen.
Tell us more about what Indigenous people are feeling and how special this moment is.
So I know Davis in Kansas also was running for Congress, so she won, and we're also in support of Paulette Jordan and just many other Indigenous women that we want to see in these positions because it's so important, and we want to see ourselves to have a voice at the table. So I'm glad, and I feel inspired myself. And I'm hopeful someday too. I would love to run for office myself. Yes.
Deb Haaland inspired you to run for office later.
I hope so, yes. It's in the making.
Well,
yes, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.
We can throw it back to you guys,
You know-
and when Deb comes on stage, we will show you her speech.
You know, Shireen, it's interesting how you ended that interview there, talking about her being inspired to run for office, because I do think that people say 2018 is the year of woman or the woman or women in general. I think it is just the beginning. I mean, it's not just women, but it's young women, and they tend to be progressive. They tend to be, some of them, like Deb Haaland, is a single mom. Shireen, we'll see if we can get back with you in just a little bit, but thanks for everything. And of course,
Thanks, Ahmed.
Rob, I just wanted to mention, or forgive me, not Rob, Brad. Wow, it's been a long day. Brad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez became the youngest woman elected to Congress. Young women, progressive, fighting for abortion rights, reproductive rights. It does seem like it's a trend.
It is, and look, she ran against a Democrat, right? This was someone who, the powers that be in New York told her to wait her turn. And she ran against, actually a good Democrat, as we like to say in D.C., Joe Crowley. But look, she felt that he was not in touch with her community. This is someone who lived in D.C., his family lived in D.C., and her community really needed someone fighting for them each and every day.
Yeah, but
and so
I gotta push back for a second because Joe Crawley was a great friend of India. My ancestral roots are in India,
Sure.
so I had a soft spot for that. But I got to know him a little bit as a young Republican woman, and I found him to be really a delight. Somebody that cared about bipartisanship. And I was really hopeful about her, and I wanted to believe that that's why I think she stood up to run. But I think her anger really got to her, and I do think it was a mix at the end of the day. He wasn't really as plugged up because of incumbency.
Sure.
You kind of get out of touch. But she also kind of has this, she's disappointed me how she's dealt with it in the aftermath. She hasn't been, I think, as gracious as one should be. I'm not saying she should kowtow to him. Yeah, like her star was on the rise, and and I just feel like she didn't know what she doesn't know.
I think that's right.
She doesn't know what she doesn't know.
20, what is she, 29?
Yeah, but
she's got some learning to do, but look, she will be, if I guess the results are in, I'm sure she's already won. It's a very safe seat.
Yeah, it's here.
I think what she's done, similar to what Deb is doing, is inspiring a whole new generation of young women to believe that they can run. Because look, here's the thing.
And they can win.
And they can win. And here's the thing that we all agree on. Our members of Congress and our Senate are way too old, way too white.
I do agree with that.
We gotta agree with
bipartisan. We can agree on that.
We're trying to shake it up.
I'm sorry that you missed that there. If you're watching, they just high five. So we're gonna.
I've now gone in for two with them. I'm like, we're sticking
gonna
together.
clip up that moment. We're gonna share it. So we got some unity here. I wanted to bring in some more people from online. This is Andrew, who says, "Flip after flip is coming from Democratic women. None seems bigger to me than the first Native American women in American history winning a seat in New Mexico. Congrats, Deb Haaland, winner of the race for the New Mexico 1st Congressional District." So bringing it back to the Native vote. Simon, you're hearing all of this. How are you reacting?
I am, yeah. I can't believe it. I mean, it took me a second to even believe that now we have two Indigenous women, two Native women at Congress, and it's taken too long. But I'm excited that now we have these Indigenous female voices at Congress to bring the Indigenous lens, and that's what's been missing. And that is what's missing in the United States, is the Indigenous lens on a variety of topics. But now at Congress, it's not just going to be people who claim to be Native or have Native ancestry, but are actually involved in their communities. I mean, they don't have to be directly from the res, but it's being involved in the community rather than claiming to be Native American. And now we have two Indigenous voices from our communities stepping in there, and I think it's going to maybe bother some people. I mean, again, our voice is often rejected. We're canceled out of the conversation because we push back on the myth-made narrative, the American myth-made narrative.
Right.
And when we say things like, honor the earth, protect the water, these are things that these are our ideologies that are tens of thousands of years old. So you're bringing ancient wisdom from this soil into Congress.
You could even say perennial wisdom. I mean, it's that attachment to the land we were referring to earlier. And you say you're excited to have two women. I'm curious your thoughts on Twitter. A lot of people saying they're waiting for results from Idaho in terms of Paulette Jordan, who could become the nation's first Native American governor, as well as the first person of color to lead that state. So, we heard a lot about intersectional resistance in the era of Trump, women and Jewish communities and Muslim communities coming together. We saw it. Do you think that it makes a difference whether you have Native American Americans, for lack of a better term, in the Senate and Congress or in the governorship? Is there a difference for you? I mean, obviously any win is good, but...
Yeah. Oh, we'll take any win as natives. I mean, over 500 years of oppression, we'll take all the wins we can get.
Right.
But I think it's important also to notice that there is the state and the local and the federal. So yeah, certain things happen on the state level that we need a Native voice to push back on. There are certain things that happen on the federal level that we need a Native voice to push back on. So I think it's significant that we'll have somebody that, again, is a Indigenous woman, and hopefully she gets this, because I think, again, we have too often marginalized Native American beliefs. We have too often, even commodified and dehumanized Indigenous people. And this is an affirmation that we're still here, that we're doctors, we're lawyers, and we're politicians. And we bring this voice that does push back against fracking and oil interests, that would poison the water. So I think if you look at a lot of the propositions in certain states, there are indigenous voices pushing back against those.
Right.
And we know full well that Deb Haaland's one of them that pushes against fracking and oil, and Sharice Davids is the
Right.
same. So this is all from a wave of Standing Rock as well.
And perhaps, Simon, it's no surprise, as you outlined, that they tend to be progressive, that they're for universal health care and for better teacher pay and expanding all the things that, at least the more progressive side of the Democratic Party rallies for. Yep. Thank you, Simon, so much for joining us. Shreen, thank you as well. We're going to leave it there, but we also want to leave you viewers with the voices of 2 additional Indigenous voters who shared their thoughts with us. Take a listen.
My name is Opal, and I'm a member of the Yavapai Apache Nation. I support Native Vote 18 because it demonstrates the resiliency of Native people who are running for office in record numbers and overcoming barriers to vote. We're also volunteering and working for candidates across the country who we know will represent us fairly and who will fight for others who are disenfranchised.
Osio Naga Gohin Dawadon Telek Janelle. I'm a citizen of Cherokee Nation. My name is Rebecca Nagel, and I live in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. This election, Native women across the country are poised to make history. New Mexico or Kansas could send the first Native woman ever to Congress with candidates Deb Haaland and Sharice Davids. In Oklahoma, I'm casting my ballot for Seminole Nation citizen Anastasia Pittman for Lieutenant Governor and absentee Shawnee tribal member Ashley McCrae for Corporate Commissioner.
Was today's vote free and fair? Many activists say no, accusing Republicans of passing voter restrictions that target minority groups. Now, Republicans say they're trying to prevent voter fraud. So where does the truth lie?
Although recent studies show that voter restrictions only affect races by a percentage point or 2, in a close election, like the one in Alabama, the black vote was enough to swing the race. Shout out to 98% of black women, and Alabama is not alone. In 2017, Republicans introduced at least 99 bills to limit access to the polls in 31 states. That's more new voting restrictions than what was enacted in 2015 and 2016 combined. Basically, Republicans are creating and promoting legislation for a non-existent issue. But critics say what the GOP really has a problem with is the choices being made by minorities at the ballot box. So isn't it time Republicans focus their efforts on something else?
With us from New York, Jessica Huseman. She is the ProPublica national politics reporter doing Electionland. Electionland, I should say, is a coalition of newsrooms around the country that are covering problems that prevent eligible voters from casting their ballots. And here with us on set, Nicole Austin Hillary is the executive director of the U.S. program at Human Rights Watch. Ladies, thanks for joining us. Wanted to ask just a quick question. Why is this so dangerous, and why is it always that there's a disproportionate number of malfunctioning electronic voting systems and all these things that go wrong tend to happen in African American communities? Nicole?
Well, I'll tell you, there are 2 reasons. First of all, the states simply have not invested enough money in terms of what they want to do about keeping machines up to date, about making sure that the resources are in place so that election integrity is actually valued and taken care of. That's number 1. Number 2, many of the states where we see these voter suppression issues are states that are dominated by members of the Republican Party in terms of the legislature, in terms of the governor's offices. And that party, very frankly, seems to think that suppressing the vote is a way to help their party win more seats. They're making political decisions versus decisions that will ensure that our democracy is open and accessible to as many people as possible.
So I want to bring up this tweet here. This is Zelly, and he's not the only person that noticed this today during voting. Taking us to Georgia. In Georgia, officials did not supply power cords for their voting machines at a polling site in a mostly African-American neighborhood.
Surprise.
The batteries died and people waited for hours. He writes, "This is voter suppression, y'all." So talk to us about what happened there, Jessica, and what's behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened is exactly what he described. You know, the election administrators there told us that they didn't have a power cord. I think there's probably more to it than that, and we're going to have to unpack that in the next couple of days. You know, you can get a power cord pretty easily during business hours in the middle of Atlanta. So why it took them so long to remedy that situation is a little bit concerning. But I do want to point out that we did see long lines all over Atlanta and all over Georgia. It was not just in that one county or even a limited number of counties. They were everywhere. And so I think that election administrators in that county were just fundamentally unprepared for the level of turnout that ended up happening in those counties. They had combined polling locations that probably shouldn't have been combined and didn't increase the resources proportionately. And so you just saw lines and lines that took hours and hours.
You know, I'm no expert on this, but I'm not a lawyer, and I know lawyers need to prove intent.
All the more reason that we have Nicole and Jessica.
My point is, you don't have to show intent. Like she said, they weren't anticipating, they didn't, you know, prepare for the number of voters. Almost seeming, I know that wasn't your intention, but this narrative seems like, you know, so many people registered to vote. It wasn't our intention to suppress. But I think voter suppression implies intentional suppression. Isn't that correct?
You know, we're not in a courtroom.
I know. I got excited because
you did get excited. But I will say this. It really takes creativity and very proactive behavior to ensure that some of the tactics that are put in place that we call voter suppression are indeed mechanized and operationalized throughout the states. You know, it takes creativity for someone to say, you know, we're going to create a requirement that IDs be shown. And we're not just going to say you can show any ID that you might have on your person. We're going to limit that list to only certain types of IDs that only certain types of people tend to have.
It seems like if you were paying attention to Twitter at all today and you have friends who happen to be in Georgia because they're reporters or people who are living in Georgia, I mean, if you just look at Kira Lerner here on Twitter saying the line to vote at the Liberty Baptist Church in Atlanta is 1.5 hours right now. Hearing reports about student IDs, people with student IDs being denied ballots, to your very point, even though student IDs are a valid form of ID in Georgia. So, I mean, what is this nefarious approach? It doesn't work?
It's an embarrassment, to be honest. I mean, look, the fact that we make it so hard, and by we, I mean our country, make it so hard for people to vote. And you look at, you know, Texas, for instance, the last midterm, only 1 in 3 people voted in the midterms in Texas, the least voting state in the country. Why? Because it's really damn hard to vote in Texas.
Exactly.
And look, when you make it harder for people to vote, communities of color in particular, that means that you as an incumbent stay in power. This is 100% a power play. And so, you know, thank God for great lawyers who are able to step in and call a spade a spade. I think, again, these voter fraud commissions, which Trump had to actually backtrack and take down, it's playing out very well in Kansas right now because Chris Kobach is getting his butt kicked in Kansas, by the way. So I think that voters do see, look, they see that when you are restricting anyone's right to vote, it's fundamentally non-democratic with a small d. And, you know, again, I think what we're seeing in Georgia, record number of African Americans, non-whites voting. There's no reason why they shouldn't be prepared. They knew that this was going to happen. They saw these numbers. And so we're seeing it, unfortunately, because of the Supreme Court case, because of Shelby and the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. Now states can do this, southern states in particular. They can close down polling locations. They can make it as hard as possible.
Also, just to lay it out for our audience, they no longer then have to get those changes approved by the federal government. So that's for our international audience. I want to read a couple of accounts from people online who we asked for what their day was like in voting and then their problems or how easy it was. We heard from so many people. So this is Sean, who says, the first half of my ballot read just fine. New York City, local positions. Then my statewide and federal just wouldn't read. Had to cancel my ballot and get a new one. Took half an hour, but definitely pales in comparison to other stories. Another person, Natasha, says the levels of disenfranchisement in the U.S. are appalling, a real stain on our democracy. How dare we as a nation deny any U.S. citizen their right to exercise the most basic function of a democracy? The way candidates feel about this important issue influences who I support. And I'll read one more live from YouTube. Daniel says, voter suppression or incompetence? Jessica, Nicole, who wants to take this first?
If I could just chime in really quick, I really want to be careful about conflating issues of lack of resources with full-on voter suppression. I think that you see across the country very expected problems today, and they were not isolated to minority communities necessarily, although they were certainly exaggerated in those communities for lots of reasons that we can talk about. But if we're talking about election administration in counties, they're not run by states, they're not run by the federal government, these are run by counties on the same budget level that gazebos get added to the park on, right? So we're talking about deeply under-resourced counties. So if we're making choices that mean that they have to spend lots and lots of money for turnout that might not come, you can see why election administrators might make different choices.
Justine, I'm just curious. I mean, it's interesting to hear you say that. It's a fair point. But if you look, oh, forgive me, Justine, I'm so bad with the names. Your name is not Justine.
He meant Jessica.
That's okay. I'll never forget your face, Jessica, or your point, your very valid point, which I want to get back to, because I often wonder when I see these reports, we see them time and time again. This is not new in America. This happens every election. So, to counterpoint you, I'm just wondering, what is the priority in this country? We hear politicians talk to us about our right to vote being our duty and our priority. In America, and is it that hard for the richest country in the world to prioritize maximizing and facilitating, whether it's 5.8 million people in Texas casting their ballots early, more than double the figure in 2014, or in Georgia? Why is it in these states? Why is it always in these states, and why each election year does it seem to be as bad or not worse? Because that's the question I had.
Point out that I don't think that it's always in these states. The biggest machine issues that we saw, bar none, in this country today were in New York City, where across the city scanners did not work. So we're not just talking about states in the deep South. We're not just talking about Georgia. We're not just talking about Tennessee. We're also talking about New York City, which likes to put itself out there as a progressive blue bastion.
Yeah, but that's a machine. Right? Forgive me. I don't mean to interject.
So a lot of the long lines in Georgia were caused by broken machines.
Right. But there's also the voter IDs, for example, like I mentioned in that tweet. There seem to be multiple, both technical and decision making in terms of people being turned away, even though they have student IDs.
Well, let's be clear. And Jessica alluded to this. These are two different issues. When it comes to resources, she's correct that counties have limited resources, but there are things that the federal government can do.
Right.
After 2000, when we were all dealing with hanging chads and these things we had never heard of, there was legislation that was passed and signed into law to give more resources to states. The National Voter Registration Act, Help America Vote Act. They ensured that states had more money for machines so that they could improve election infrastructure. So that's one issue. The issue of suppression is another issue. Those are moves that are being made by decision makers in states who want to keep certain parts of the electorate down in terms of their voter participation. So we do have to make sure to keep these issues clear. And we also have to take Congress to task. There are things that Congress can do with respect to both of those issues. There's legislation they can pass to get more resources to the states, but there's also legislation they can pass to ensure that states have a harder time suppressing the vote. So let's be clear in terms of where the responsibility lies. And it really has to be a multifaceted approach to trying to deal with it.
I like that you made that distinction here. I want to bring in two more comments on YouTube. This is Dave who says, embracing technology would fix it. People should be able to vote over the internet, phones, banking machines, and anything else connected to the web. He's not the only one with that line of thought, but he goes on to say 2018 and people still have to line up at the polls. That's voter suppression when people should be voting on the internet, their phones, the banking machines. I think he's a bit tongue-in-cheek there, of course. Not exactly voter suppression, but it is surprising. What was your vote like today?
My vote, it was an hour line in D.C., which was interesting. It was an hour-long wait, but people were excited about the wait. But no, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, look, the challenge is always the integrity of the vote, right? So, I mean, I think my generation, millennials, Gen Z, they want to vote on their Uber app or, they're postmating their life away, so they want to be able to vote like this. Our ancestors fought and bled and died for the right to vote. You can stand in line for a half hour, right? Like, let's let's sack up a little bit. Excuse my language.
People can't stay on the same website for 2 minutes. You want them to stand in line. They don't have their phone. They're gone.
But let me tell you about what happened to me today. And I live in the Maryland suburbs. My precinct actually ran out of ballots.
Wow.
And voters were upset because voters said, didn't you know as the day was progressing that you were going to run out of ballots? And they even ran out of the provisional ballots, which they then resorted to using once they ran out of the regular ballots. So that kind of thing should not be happening. And no voter is going to be patient for that. Preparation is going to make the difference, and all of these elections officials should be prepared for that.
And I see Jessica, not Justine. Jessica is nodding. Jessica, apologies about that earlier, but I do want to kind of just circle back one more time, because you did say there are two separate issues, but, and by you, I mean, of course, forgive me, Nicole. Two separate issues, fine, but aren't they related? Jennifer Shepard's saying right here, why don't more states use absentee ballots? That's what Washington state uses.
Sure.
And I'm curious, you know, Jessica, when we look at Georgia particularly, I mean, to take, you know, Nicole's earlier point, I understand that since 2015, Governor Kemp, you know, doesn't back up voting machines with paper ballots, that, you know, when we heard that the federal government can step in and provide aid and resources and funding, Georgia turned it down to prevent the electoral system from being hacked specifically. So are they related or are they really separate, and does it matter?
So, you know, Georgia does have outdated voting machines. I think that's been well established under court law. I don't know that you could say that their outdated technology is inherently voter suppression, because the technology is outdated statewide. So I think conflating those two issues is two different conversations. I also, you know, I know that we broke a story yesterday talking about how insecure Georgia's voter registration system was. And so, you know, certainly this is a nationwide problem that needs attention, that states across the country need to assign more resources to this problem. But no, I think that you need to talk about them as two separate issues.
I want to go now to a community comment that we got via video. This is Kat Colvin. Have a listen.
One of the things we have to talk about when we talk about voter suppression is voter education. A lot of people don't go to the polls because it can be really confusing to vote. Whether it's your first time or you've done it a million times, it can be really hard to know what are all the offices that I'm voting for, what do all these ballot measures mean. And so one of the things we really have to talk about when we talk about the reasons people don't go to the polls is education for voters.
So education, it seems like it's something that has gotten better. And you know, before I was voting, I signed up, got information via text message all throughout the week telling me where my polling station was, what time to vote, making sure I was registered at the right place. Nicole, where do you think we are in terms of education levels right now, and where should we be?
You know, I have to tell you, I'm always telling people that despite all of these nasty issues that we deal with in this country around voter suppression, around election integrity, really the biggest problem that we have is voter participation. And part of that is because we no longer have civics education in this country. You know, 60 Minutes did a story this past Sunday that showed two of the Supreme Court justices, Sotomayor and Gorsuch, who are on a mission to get civics education put back into schools. We have to ensure that people are educated about what it means to be a good citizen. And part of that is understanding the systems of government, the three different branches, understand what it means to vote, and all of the different aspects of voting. So that's really our biggest issue. Once we get people registered, which is all great and good, you have to get them to the polls, and you have to get them to be educated voters. And that's one of our biggest issues. And frankly, you know, for us at Human Rights Watch, voting is a right. It is a human rights issue. It's not just a civil rights issue, it's a human rights issue. And we have to look at all of the different variables that impact voter participation and a voter experience. It is the suppression, it is the election integrity issues around the machine, but it's also what are voters exposed to and educated about that will help them to be good and active citizens.
You're nodding your head.
I'm nodding my head because she's so right. I think, look, a lot of my work is with youth voters, young voters, millennials. We are now the largest eligible voting bloc, but we vote so poorly. 12% of millennials voted in the last midterms, right? And I think a lot of it comes down to this. Millennials never got civics. We never really got the basics of why voting matters. And again, culturally, I think growing up in Jersey, we were taught that it's not polite to talk about politics at the dinner table, right? You don't want to ask your neighbor who they voted for. And yet when they turn 18, turn 19, we're saying, vote.
Yeah.
You should vote.
Same for
It's
me.
like, well, wait, I wasn't supposed to talk about politics at the dinner table. So there's a fundamental disconnect, and I think the good news is, because I always try to be optimistic. I'm like annoyingly optimistic.
I like that. We need more of that.
We need that,
Keep it,
right?
keep going.
I'm trying to be optimistic. Is that because of these past 2 years, young people have realized, wait a second, by us just sitting on the sidelines, we allowed this to happen, right? Non-voters elected Donald Trump.
Let me
right?
break that down.
That's really what it comes
level.
down to.
Yeah, I called Trump. I've called Trump a lot of things, okay? And I still have an R next to my name, despite working for an independent presidential candidate in 2016. I called him lame last week on air somewhere, and it was a group of older women. They're like, lame? You could call him so many things. I'm like, I have, but here I will call him lame because somehow I also still fit under the cover of millennial. And I completely agree with everything you said. It's like I grew up in southern West Virginia, a very rural community, and it was not polite to talk politics. And if you disagreed with somebody, you did so respectfully, but you weren't provocative about it to the point where people are now, which I think is actually sometimes a good thing. But back to my original point of Trump being lame. And I use lame because it's sort of like, this guy's corrupt. Right? And he still managed to get the highest office in the land. He's using the presidency to enrich his own family. And I just think millennials, people who've woken up to the younger set of us, and not intending to be ageist here at all, but it's just that's lame. We knew what that was. And we let that happen. Us not turning out let this happen. So the need for civic education, just sort of what it means to exercise your vote, the impact of it, it's so necessary, and we've got to do it in a form that's so palatable now because it's a new era.
Jessica, I hear you, and I'm going to give you the last word for this segment. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that we saw across the country today evidence that millennials did want to turn out, but they didn't understand how to. So there were long lines at college campuses, even in towns and counties where there were no long lines in the rest of the city, suggesting that it was a specific problem to those college campuses. And what we found is that the poll workers weren't doing anything wrong. College students legitimately didn't understand what it took to be registered, didn't understand what they needed to bring to the polls with them. So I think that there's a problem in this country that even when students do want to turn out, they can't because they've not been told how to do so.
Sure. Jessica underscores my point.
Well, yeah, Jessica, I was just going to say, everyone was nodding in the studio, even our camera operator. But thanks so much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this segment. Nicole and Jessica and the imaginary Jennifer I referred to. You can follow ProPublica's coverage of voter access on Twitter at Electionland. We're actually going to take a little break right now and dip into Al Jazeera English's live election night coverage.
And Democrats still pretty hopeful of taking the House of Representatives, so we're going to keep a close eye on that figure as well for you. Now, many of President Trump's signature foreign policies are still in development, so the outcome of these elections could have a huge impact on how he proceeds on the international stage. Our diplomatic editor, James Bays, has more details.
The world is watching these elections very closely, and they'll be watching in Iran. There were fresh sanctions in the last 24 hours. Most of those that were lifted under the 2015 Iran nuclear deal are now firmly back in place. Iran's already suffering a great deal of economic damage. It's going to get worse. They'll need now to make a political decision in Tehran, and in part it'll depend on these elections. Perhaps they'll get an early indication if Trump's going to be a one-term or a two-term president and whether they can wait him out. The investigation into the death of Jamal Khashoggi may also be affected by the elections. Saudi Arabia is not cooperating on handing over the suspects or on helping to find the journalist's body. So there could now be other legal steps. If Turkey requests it, there could perhaps even be an international UN-led investigation. In Congress, watch for efforts to take action against Saudi Arabia under the Magnitsky Act or the possibility of new congressional investigations. Next, Yemen, with Saudi Arabia under pressure, look for Congress to take renewed interest in the devastating war. There's already a new push for a ceasefire by the Trump administration. And I can tell you at the UN in New York, the UK is starting efforts to draw up a Security Council resolution on the ceasefire. The plan is all of this would lead to peace talks in Sweden at the end of the month. Highly awaited, too, is the Trump administration's Middle East peace plan. The UN has recently been warning of fresh conflict, particularly in Gaza. But the Palestinians have already written off the still-to-be-unveiled plan being devised by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. I'm also hearing whispers that the International Criminal Court may soon make a ruling on whether to pursue investigations into Israeli actions. In Syria, there could be a final military push by the Assad regime and its Russian allies. Efforts by the UN to get talks going on a new constitution have been making very little progress as a new UN Special Envoy, Geir Pedersen from Norway, prepares to start work. Afghanistan is another key priority for the administration and for the new Congress. After 17 years of war, the Taliban has been gaining ground on the battlefield. There's a new effort by the US to talk to the Taliban, being led by top diplomat Zalmay Khalilzad. But there's very little immediate prospect of progress because of Afghanistan's own political calendar, with presidential elections due in April next year.
Well, Patty Culhane has been discussing the impact from the midterm verdict on foreign policy. And just a short time ago, she was joined by Brett Kavanaugh, a former Obama White House official, and Republican strategist Alfredo Franco.
Midterm elections aren't usually all about foreign policy, and 2018 is really no exception. But it is still a factor. We've heard many voters say they are voting in order to put a check on U.S. President Donald Trump, and that could have huge consequences for his foreign policy priorities. So we're going to take a look at that, a little bit of a deeper dive. I'm joined right now by Brett Kavanaugh. He's the former director of global engagement under President Barack Obama, so Democrat. And Adolfo Franco, you're the former advisor to the late Senator John McCain, so the Republican. Have to be fair here. Adolfo, first, I want to talk to you about Saudi Arabia. After the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, there was universal, bipartisan condemnation. The president seemed to be the one dragging his feet, maybe to put it in that way, dragging his feet a little bit on trying to sanction or point blame at the highest levels of the Saudi government. If Democrats do take the House, as is widely expected, does that change the equation at all as how the president responds to Saudi Arabia?
I don't think so. And you're absolutely right. There has been bipartisan outrage, to say the least. But, you know, recently Secretary Pompeo, I think, expressed the president's views, and that is this is a very serious matter, and we will continue to press the Saudis on it, but not willing to risk the relationship with Saudi Arabia over this even horrific incident. But you hit the nail on the head. One chamber is likely to shift. But the other chamber is, and it takes two to really do anything effectively, will be in Republican hands in all likelihood, meaning the Senate. So I don't think that will be much of a change. And most importantly of all, in the United States, of course, the conduct of foreign policy, the actual conduct, not necessarily the appropriation, of course, of money, is in the hands of the President of the United States and not the Congress.
It has evolved that way. I don't think the framers expected that to be the case. But Brett, let me ask you, there's been a lot of reporting, especially in the New York Times, that the Trump administration has decided that they have to stay with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, but in exchange for their support, and in a way to try and exact some concessions from him, they're going to try and force him to either end the war in Yemen or the Gulf crisis. Either, do you think, likely?
I actually think it goes beyond that. In fact, while Pompeo and Trump may try to sweep this under the rug and move on, I don't know that the Congress, both sides of Capitol Hill, the House and the Senate, are going to let Saudi Arabia off that easily. We've also seen clearly how Turkey is playing their hands very carefully and skillfully in this. I think the consequences are going to go beyond just a slap on the wrist. The other that I would point out is there's more agreement, not only on Saudi Arabia, but on world issues like Russia, even China, on Capitol Hill than we've seen with the White House. So foreign policy, while it's traditionally been run by the administration, may not continue to be so.
Bill Schneider is public policy professor at George Mason University, joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Now, we've heard earlier in this program from other guest correspondents that the polls have been pretty spot on, and we're seeing the Senate going to the Republicans as it was thought. Did you agree with that?
Yes, things are going as expected, which is very interesting news because in 2016, things did not go as expected. Donald Trump was not expected to win. And my view is he probably got a mandate out of the fact that he did better than expected. This time, things went as expected. The House is going to go Democratic. The Senate is going to stay Republican. And Democrats are making some pretty big gains in some important states for governor's races.
Have they done as well as they should have done? Because there was a huge groundswell of support, wasn't there, on the Republican side? At least that's what we heard throughout the media. Have they managed to capitalise on that as extensively as they could?
Well, Democrats would, in their feverish imaginings, they would see a blue wave coming and that they were going to completely sweep everyone, all the Republicans away. That was not going to happen. What we did see wasn't the blue wave. What we saw was polarization. We saw Republicans rushing to the polls to protect their president, Democrats who were infuriated by Trump opposing him. I just looked at the exit poll and I found out that state by state, what controlled the outcome was Trump's popularity. In states where Trump is popular, Republicans did very well. In states where Trump is not popular, they did not do very well. And in states that were closely divided, which includes Texas, the results were closely divided. This election was all about Donald Trump. It was not about the economy, which is a surprise.
Absolutely, because he didn't capitalise on that, did he? He didn't choose to make this about the economy when he was campaigning. He chose more divisive issues, such as immigration, which rallied voters from both sides. How much do you think Donald Trump is going to accept responsibility for tonight?
He will never accept a defeat on anything. Even if he had lost the Senate, he would explain it away. He's already done that. But Donald Trump did get a defeat tonight because there is a House of Congress that will see its mandate as actually trying to stop Donald Trump. The House of Representatives, the Democratic majority in the House, will do whatever they can to stop Trump. There'll be pressure from the left to impeach Donald Trump, which the House can do, but it's unlikely they will actually be able to do it because that splits Democrats. All the talk of impeachment, a lot of Democratic candidates did bring that up, including Beto O'Rourke in Texas. What that did was drive Republicans to the polls to come out and protect their president.
OK, Bill Schneider, for the moment, thanks very much. We will come back to you for more analysis there from Washington, D.C. Let's now, though, go over to Heidi Do Castro. She's in Tucson, Arizona. Now, we were just, Bill Schneider was just mentioning there, Beto O'Rourke. He was against Ted Cruz in Texas, next door to you. He lost, but it was a very close race, wasn't it?
Now to perhaps the most divisive issue in the country, immigration. Family separations, so-called migrant caravans, birthright citizenship. These debates are what will have driven many voters to the polls today, and many first-time voters, too.
My name is Pranav Logan, and I was born in India. I recently just got citizenship last year after 17 years. My reason for voting is to kind of show the broader context of immigration and actually how hard it is to immigrate to this country. I'm looking forward to electing leaders that can have that conversation and provide some nuance to the discussion.
Well, here with us on set, Loida George is an immigration lawyer. Welcome back to the stream. She's a familiar face for those of you who watch the stream regularly. I also want to introduce Amayan Ebenga. He's a correspondent for AJ+. She's joining us from Beto O'Rourke's watch party in El Paso, Texas. Now, before we get started on Texas specifically, I want you to take a look at this video from AJ+ explaining the history of Texas voting.
For the first time in 30 years, every congressional district, even the most Republican, has a Democratic challenger, and a handful of them are actually expected to flip blue, even some that have been GOP strongholds since the 1960s. Texas Dems are also targeting the Republican state attorney general, who's currently under indictment. Espinoza says Democrats' hopeful outlook is all because of the changing of Texas demographics.
It's the Latino populations around the state, and that this is a population that will rise, awaken, and seize its political power. But what you're also seeing are other groups from around the state. And it's all these new people moving to Texas who are saying to themselves, wait a minute, I'm a Texan too. I can vote, I have a voice, I have something to say. And that's what's challenging this Republican power right now.
So we are about to go to that watch party now in Texas, El Paso, Texas, where the Democratic challenger to the Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz just lost. This is Beto O'Rourke. I want to share this tweet before we do, though, because there is sadness online, but there's also a sense of accomplishment. LeVar here says, I don't care if you lost. You made them tremble with the simple prospect of real change. You are one of us. I have nothing but respect and admiration for you. I'm in tears. I can only hope you run for president. So big leap there for Beto O'Rourke. I want to go to you, MIN. What is the mood like? What is the atmosphere like? It almost sounds cliche to ask since it used to be a victory party, or it started out as wanting to be a victory party. What are you hearing from people?
Yeah, I think before this party first started tonight, there was a lot of enthusiasm and energy from Beto's supporters, hoping, thinking, believing that they could come out and beat Ted Cruz. But there was always this undercurrent that, hey, it was likely that Beto wasn't going to win, and the real win would be just turning out new voters, just showing the demographics of Texas changing. And the mood here was very high, very energetic. And then on the big screen behind us, they showed a projection, the first projection that came out about Ted Cruz taking the win, and it just sort of sucked the air out of this stadium. We're in a stadium that seats at least 7,000 people. And it's really full right now. We've been playing music, hearing people still chanting Beto's name. We heard nothing from the candidate himself.
You know, Amayan, I want to ask you, I mean, obviously you're describing a kind of somber mood, but there has been mixed news coming out of Texas. I don't know if you know, but Texas has sent the first 2 Latinas to Congress. And I want to know, like, what your read is on, beyond the governor's race, what's your read on how that's going to play out in other races in the state?
Here's the thing that most people don't realize about Texas. So Texas is a very young state. The average age is 35, and 40% of the state is Latino. So when Beto was mounting his campaign, part of what it would take for him to win was turning out that Latino vote, and that's what they had hoped to do. Because it's such a young state, because so many people are Latino, it means that so many people right now that are currently under 18, a lot of young people coming up are in that demographic. And the Democratic Party here feels like, hey, that's our opportunity to take Texas and change it from red to purple to blue. When we talked to a Republican strategist just in September about this, he said there was no way Beto was going to win. He figured he would get 45% of the vote, and it's just this ongoing sort of fever dream that Democrats have that Texas is going to be blue. And he knew that even though, Ted Cruz has a low favorability rating, he has a low approval rating, he felt like what he called quote-unquote Texas values would turn out in the end for Ted Cruz. But the thing is, I think this race was much tighter than some people thought it would be. This should have been a race that Ted Cruz pulled out easily and immediately, and ended up getting all this national attention, all this coverage. So this may be a win for the Democratic Party here in Texas, and we cannot overstate the importance that in a state that's as big as Texas, that has 40% of the population that's Latino, that has the largest African American community of any state, that it is just sending in 2018 its first 2 female Latina representatives into Congress. That is huge on a night where now the Democrats now control the House. Maybe not by as much as they thought before, but it's, they're controlling it now and they weren't before. So they do at least have one branch in the legislature in Congress.
Right. Thanks for explaining that shift there. I think it's interesting, but what's also interesting for our audience that doesn't know is that MIN is in El Paso, which is a border state. It's on the border between the U.S. and Mexico, the southern border there. And of course, one of the hot button issues this time, it's been since 2016, since the campaign, right, Ahmed, of course, has been immigration. I want to share with you what our community thinks of the rhetoric around immigration. So we asked what people think of President Donald Trump's words around this hot button issue. This is what Benjamin says. Hearing Trump saying barbed wire was a beautiful thing turned my stomach, and talking about that on the border. These migrants are looking for a better life and environment to raise their children. Above all, they seek hope in a dark world, and Trump has just turned the light off for them. So Benjamin, of course, thinks one way. Other people online think differently, Loida, but talk to us about where you see immigration playing in these midterm elections.
I think what's happening, especially if the House shifts, is an opportunity for comprehensive immigration reform. We heard or we saw the possibilities of that happen before the last election, and it just fell flat. But I think what's happening now is almost creating a space where it's ripe for, we need something to happen.
Right.
And I don't know that it's a lose for immigration if we can ride this tide, this blue wave in the House at least.
It's time for a serious discussion about immigration in this country. I mean, what can we actually agree on? Because what I'm seeing from the returns tonight is a Congress, at least on the House side, with a GOP conference that is becoming extremely Trumpy. We know
Trumpy.
Trump, I mean, I
like that.
That is a new one.
should I say Trumpian? Trumpist?
We all knew what you meant.
What's the thing?
It's a noun, it's a verb, it's an adjective.
It's a thing.
It's a color as well.
We all know what it means.
Okay, so he's remade the GOP in his image. We know this. But what that does is, again, take immigration back to a concern where it's a national security issue. These brown people arriving at our borders, and what are they going to do to our jobs and to our buildings and to our just security? So in essence, compassionate conservatism is dead. Jeb Bush was, I think, the last sort of like torch holder of that. We need to talk about how we help people who come here and want to contribute to our society, to our economy, and become citizens. My parents immigrated here legally, so I'm like big on the get in line, do it right. I do take offense to people, stepping out of line and trying to play games. But I also understand that there are people who come here seeking asylum, and that's a right. And we need to have just this conversation about what is immigration anymore? What's it doing to this country? Because the face of the country is changing, as we keep saying tonight, right?
Right. And what's interesting is, even though we're discussing this topic of Texas and immigration with a somber kind of outlook there, and not to suggest that one party is not, but the people where Mayan is are sad about the fact that O'Rourke lost. Democrat Colin Allred is projected to win Texas's 32nd district. It's not finalized, but the reason I bring this up, because not only would it be a major victory for the Democrats, but he zeroed in on healthcare. Sure, Trump and the Republicans wanted to talk about immigration because it plays to fears.
Sure.
And I saw this when we were in Tennessee. I mean, we've seen this in Texas, we've seen this in Georgia. If you look at the NBC exit polls, or if you just ask people, if you just travel around this country, you ask people what they care about. Yes, we have to have a serious conversation about immigration, but everyone I spoke to in Tennessee said healthcare.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Allred did. He zeroed in on healthcare, and he made that distinction between the Republicans and the Democrats. And the reason I'm tying these two issues together is because when you ask people, when I went to Tennessee and I asked people, do you care about immigration? Do you care about this migrant caravan? They said, yeah, sort of. But immediately they volunteered and they proactively brought up healthcare, which is a crosshouse. And in fact, I think we have a little clip of the effect the fear-mongering had in Tennessee on some of those Republican voters there. Let's listen in. This town is 95% white. There aren't any immigrants coming to this town.
No.
So how are they taking your jobs?
Well, they're not. But I'm just saying that's the only thing that would bother me if
Right.
they did.
Then you see bombs sent in the mail to these people. You know what I mean?
You think they set themselves up?
You think that?
I think that.
Really?
Yeah.
It is a concern if they're taking our jobs and they're taking, our benefits.
That worries me right there.
What does?
Them all being here, got their own business, they get tax-free write-offs and everything else. We never got that, and we lived under all our lives.
Right. And who are these people exactly?
All these Muslims and whatever.
So there you heard Carl saying some of those things that obviously sound racist, and that's because I had asked them the question, but later on they started talking about healthcare, and once they started talking about healthcare, I couldn't get them to shut up, much like you can't do to me. Monica, did you see what I did there?
I do see what you did there. I want to bring in a little bit of breaking news. If it looked like I wasn't listening to Ahmed there, it's only because I was on my computer. I was on google.com, where they've got their vote election results rolling in. 2018 Florida gubernatorial election results live. This is updated as of 11:03 p.m. Eastern. 49.9% for Ron DeSantis and 48.9% for Andrew Gillum. Gillum, of course, was the Democrat there, and Ron the Republican. So we see the end result there. I want to go, though, to a video comment that we got from a member of our community to take this back to the voters, the people at the heart of this conversation. And one of them is Yesenia. Yesenia talks about the issue that brought her to the polls.
Even though presidential elections are important, so are local elections, because those elections are the ones that impact the Latinx and undocumented community directly. As of right now, there are 29 million registered Latinx that are eligible to vote. And now more than ever, Latinos are running for office, especially Latina women. This current administration has tried to undermine the Latinx and undocumented community, but this November 6th, we will show this administration the power of the Latinx vote and the power of the undocumented community, as many are working on various campaigns. The Latinx wave is here.
And Maya, she talked about the power of the Latinx vote and the power of the undocumented community. What's your take on that?
Listen, everyone we spoke to here since we've landed in El Paso, when we asked them what is on the ballot for you, they said two things, and you heard it echoed in Tennessee. They said healthcare, and they also said immigration. Even last night when Beto O'Rourke was making his final push at his last rally here in his hometown where everybody had a lot of enthusiasm for him, what he said is that El Paso could be an example to the rest of the nation. As you guys said earlier, it is a border city. It sits here, right on the border of Mexico. And he's saying here it's a community that embraces immigrants, that has immigrants, and first-generation people, and second-generation people, and they live here in harmony. And that could be an example for the rest of the nation. We also heard one Hispanic LGBT member tell us that actually he was also voting on that issue as well. So it wasn't just about, being Hispanic, but also being Latinx and where that meets, that intersectionality. So those two issues are things that came up. And I think the most intriguing person that I actually met was this Hispanic woman who had been a Trump voter just 2 years ago, but was so unhappy with the president. She said she voted for him because she thought the nation needed a strong man at the helm. And she just thinks she has a very low approval or idea of what he's been doing, and so she was choosing to vote for Beto because of the people around her, so she was very influenced by that. So this idea of pulling out that Hispanic vote, and we had heard in September that Texas is neither a state that is red or blue, that it is gray, because it consistently has some of the lowest voter turnout in the nation. And this year, that was different. Its early voter turnout surpassed what it did in 2012. And what we're going to see, we don't know right now, but what we're going to be looking into tonight, tomorrow, and for the next week probably, is who came out to vote. Because that's probably what made the difference here between Beto's win and Beto's loss. Are those early voters people who would naturally vote today on a Tuesday and they were just energized to vote early? Or did they actually turn out new people? And also, if they turned out all these new people, were they for the Democrats? Because you also could have been energizing voters who see Trump. I mean, so many people we talked to said that Trump wasn't even on the ballot for that year in Texas. It was just about things like immigration and healthcare.
Right, and you bring up immigration and healthcare. Obviously, those two issues were tied. And the reason I wanted to play that clip, Loita, earlier, I don't know if you could hear some of the kind of fear-mongering effects. He wasn't even sure who he was worried would invade on those caravans, whether they were Muslims or whatever, or Mexicans. And it just shows the power of words and rhetoric and how it can evoke fear. But I'm curious, Angel Shining saying here, Texas is becoming more diversified, so in the future it will not just be assumed Republican. In your estimation, do you think that immigration is going to be an issue that actually changes some of these preconceived notions and narratives about southern states like Texas and Georgia being so susceptible to this hardline immigration rhetoric?
Well, I think it depends which states. I think Texas is ripe for a shift in perspective because it's a border state and you have a large Latinx community there. But for communities like where you featured in Tennessee, where you're not on the border, you have a sprinkle of immigrants in different pockets, namely in metropolitan areas. I think what will drive the narrative would be what you see on the media. And also how the media presents this discussion. I think the fear-mongering has also everything to do with how much it's pushed in the 24-hour news cycle. Because at the end of the day, the caravan that's coming from Central America are just folks that are scared. They're frightened for their lives. They're not a group of vigilantes. And they're not coming to sneak across the border. They're coming to legally request for asylum.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's a twofold discussion on what could drive that narrative. But I think when you're talking about border states like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, where you're going to see a shift in the demographics in that population in the next, as your clip was saying, folks that are not able to vote right now are more than likely going to be able to vote in a couple of years. You may not see that in places like Tennessee, Alabama, or Mississippi, but who knows? Because even those states actually have pockets of large immigrant communities. So there's kind of this unknown about what's going to happen in the next 2 years.
Yeah, the trajectory.
I wanted to bring up a story, a success story, according to some people, of another immigrant to the United States. This is Ilhan Omar. 2018 Minnesota's 5th congressional district election results. This is via Google. Ilhan Omar is projected to win 78.5%. Of course, she won her primary, and even back then, people said she's projected to just kind of slide on through. But I want to take you to her acceptance speech. This is tweeted from Hannah Alam, a BuzzFeed reporter. Congress member-elect Ilhan Omar's first words upon taking the stage, Assalamu alaikum, peace be on you in Arabic. The next words, Alhamdulillah, praise be to God. My grandfather taught me that when you see injustice, you fight back. You do not give in to sorrow. You do not give in to sadness. You organize. You can see that there. We'll be tweeting it out so you can actually hear it as well. So that's just a little aside there when we talk about successful immigrant stories there. But I wanted to go to this comment we got from YouTube. Dave again. You've heard him earlier in our program. Dave says, the root cause of immigration is horror that makes one want to leave and to go elsewhere. Rena, though, that horror, that idea that no one will leave a place to come to another place and do that difficult trek, the caravan, of course, that a lot of people are talking about, I hesitate using that term because I think it has derogatory undertones. But the people that are coming to the United States in an organized fashion clearly have something that is driving them here, that they will take the trek, many of them walking on foot to get here, dangerous conditions. Yet this idea is not something that always seems to come up among politicians. The idea that they're not just, some of them are not just coming for economic reasons. There are real issues and dangers that some of them may be facing.
Well, I just want to start by acknowledging, words matter, like you just said, and that's why we're where we are. My family on my dad's side escaped Idi Amin's regime, and our lives were forever changed.
In Uganda.
Yes, and it's hard for me because on one hand, I grew up knowing what an oppressive regime can do and how all the hard work of 3 generations was lost overnight. And it's hard for me because that's why I'm a Republican, because I fear that really big government. And I also don't want government to become so big where it just enters lives. I always say as a Republican, I don't want government in my backyard, my bedroom, or in my bank account. I really believe in freedom and liberty, but I believe in it for everyone across the world, like not just because I'm American. And this idea of others, right? And us not understanding who they are, where they're coming from, that's what's going on right now. When we talk about these people coming up and coming to our border and wanting to be here, they're others. We're not willing to understand
that.
them.
But wouldn't you say that the Republican Party for decades has been pushing that narrative and has relied on it? I mean, we've spent all night talking about Trump as if he concocted this idea of fear-mongering on racial lines. This has been happening particularly amongst the Republican Party for decades.
Well, okay, so I agree and disagree.
How do you marry the two?
Yeah, I'm going to marry the two by saying that I've been a lifelong Republican. I came up in the party as sort of a young activist who just believed in prosperity and the ideas and the free markets and competition, all the things that were seemingly good. So fiscal conservative through and through over here. Socially a bit liberal, went to liberal arts college in the United States. So, it happens. You become a little bit more liberal. I never experienced racism firsthand. Not that I'm saying that
but you're aware of decades of proven
of
record amongst Republican officials of really capitalizing off
Indeed.
otherizing demographics across the country.
It has happened, but I also don't want to say it just happened on one side.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I think when we do that,
I'm going to defend you here. Look at this Democrat defending Republican. I mean, I do think that, look, I think that it's not the entire Republican Party, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that
they're leading
the broad
effort.
Yes,
swath.
I think that there are. I think the biggest, in my opinion, I think Donald Trump is not an outcome of the Republican Party. He's an outcome of Fox News.
Right.
No offense to Fox News.
That's a great point.
But Fox News was really the medium that really drove this narrative of fear.
Yeah, no doubt.
If you want to just like pop in some fear 24/7, you watch Fox News. My parents are Republicans; they love that. It's very exciting
Republicans
to watch
across
Fox
the land
News.
are like, that's for us. Yeah.
But Republicans, the Republicans that Obama worked with, trying, the Gang of Eight, trying to get an immigration reform bill passed. They were sensible. I mean, after the autopsy of Obama winning, they really did try to figure out a way that immigration was this opportunity to really bring the country together.
I was part of that effort.
Point.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, in this past election, you had very moderate Republicans like Jeb Bush really advocate for that, really reach out to the Latino community, really talk about bringing the country together. And Donald Trump just swept the floor with all of them.
And his voice was drowned out. Jeb's voice was drowned out because of the sensationalism.
That's right. Well, because look, it's just a lot easier, again, to motivate people with fear. Yeah. It's just, I mean, we saw in 2016. We're seeing it again a little bit here in these election results in the Senate. It's going to be a challenge. I think it's going to be a challenge largely because if you take a look at the landscape of the House now, the Republicans who lost seats were the moderate Republicans.
I mean, I'm over here like, this is my worst nightmare. Honestly,
these are all her people.
This was everybody I fought for in the past 2 years to stay is gone.
Yeah,
I'm talking Curbelo, Comstock, Scott Taylor. Like, I did not wake up this morning thinking this would happen.
And those are
I'm
the
a long time
people,
off
those
of
are the members that probably would have pushed for.
They've been pushing and they lost because of the Trump effect.
Comprehensive
So
And exactly.
Our audience, to your point, Rena, she did not wake up this morning thinking this would happen. I dare say perhaps the people who are with Imayan also did not wake up this morning thinking this would happen. Wrap for us as we end this segment. And of course, I'll get a final word from Loida as well. Where are voters going now, the ones that you're talking to? Because this is a disappointment. This is a deflation. So then what happens next in future elections?
This is a disappointment and a deflation. But I will say, when I went around and I was talking to people, one of the questions I had was like, if Beto loses, what happens next year? And overwhelmingly, every single person I asked that question to said, this only makes me want to fight harder in 2020 and going forward. I will vote in the presidential election and in midterms going forward. Today, even today, we met someone who had never voted in a midterm election in his life. He's a veteran of Desert Storm, and for this he came out and he voted, and he said even though even if Beto lost this, he would vote to move forward. We met young people who said that. So this may be the win or the pickup for the Democratic Party in Texas may be that they have gotten the base, energized the base, and see if they can build upon it moving forward. Because the state is at a really intriguing and particular moment. It actually shares a lot with California, which is what most people don't realize in terms of their Latino population. But one is red and one is blue. And this community is what makes the difference in this state. So I think going forward, we have to look at who turns out, when they turn out, how early, and how we can build upon that. Because the Democratic Party over the last 2 election cycles has continued to increase its base here, and the Republicans have increased it, but only by a little bit, but the Democrats are hitting double digits out there. So it's not enough to win tonight for Beto in 2018, but that doesn't mean in 2020 and 2022 and 2024 or some other future term that Texas doesn't look a lot different than what we know it to be these last 20 years.
Right. Lloyd, a similar question to you as we wrap this segment, your crystal ball here, because we're going to have you back on the air in the future, in the near future, I'm sure of it, talking about immigration and other issues here. But where do you see voters going next? And this issue, this hot button issue, which at least in the headlines has taken over from healthcare, which was, we saw at the very beginning of the year. Where do you see it going?
Well, aside from the rhetoric and the vitriol and the fear mongering and all that awful stuff, there's what's happening on the day-to-day front lines, and there is what is not sensationalized, and that's how Trump's policies have impacted the way immigration laws are implemented. And there's much that you're not seeing in the headlines. It's harsh. and it's really made some lasting negative impacts on families, American families. Many of these families have mixed status within one household. And I'm seeing, at least from behind the veil, folks being really riled up to actually say, okay, how can we make sure the people in the House understand the impacts of what this rhetoric and the way that these laws are being exercised right now, and how our broken system is not getting anything done. So it is my hope, I don't know about crystal ball, but it is my hope that the sum of all this actually galvanizes some action for comprehensive immigration reform finally.
And how can we end on anything other than hope?
I don't know.
Yeah, no crystal balls here, but some hope. So thanks so much, Loita, for being with us and for that hope. And thanks to Amayan as well for those live updates from Texas. You can keep up with her reporting on Twitter at AJ+ and II Writes. But now shifting gears to what kind of me, in a way.
Kind of you.
Don't want to make it about me, but kind of. Arab Americans vote, believe it or not. A poll conducted by the Arab American Institute found that 90% of Arab Americans plan to vote in 2016, and turnout among the community is actually consistently higher than average. Earlier this year, the stream featured just a small number of Arab candidates running for office, but we also have joining us live, I believe, from Ocean Drive in Miami to help us touch upon who Arabs are voting for today and what impact specifically those votes might have. Fadi Mansour is a correspondent for Al Jazeera Arabic. Fadi, thanks for being with us. Could you just frame for us the importance of this voting bloc and what you think we can expect?
Yes, Ahmed, thank you. Well, although we have some surveys about Arab American voters and how they vote, but in general, when we deal with this group in the U.S., we more generalize and talk about it as Muslim Americans, because it's really hard to find adequate numbers talking about Arab Americans and how they vote. Although we're seeing a more enthusiastic base, especially among the younger generation, and that because they're being more progressive. And you can trace this back to the campaign of Senator Bernie Sanders, who created this new space on the progressive side or on the left side of the Democratic Party, the establishment itself, that although it tried to use identity politics and use minorities to its own benefit in elections and talking about their issues, whether it's immigration or civil rights or whatever, but it did not create this space for Arab Americans or Muslim Americans to be part of the political landscape in the sense of running for office. And what we're seeing now is a new space being created with this, let's call it progressive wave. I'm not sure if it's going to be able to sustain itself and how long this wave will last, but at least Arabs were able to benefit in order to vote more and in order to vote new elected officials from their own community. The most important thing now is that Arab Americans in general, whether they are candidates and even Muslim Americans, they're not confined to the limits of what their community can pull as a weight in the political landscape in the US, which means it seems to me we're in some kind of a shift, a new chapter in American political life, where Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, because they are defining themselves as being progressive on the issues, whether internally or foreign policy, they are able to connect with other communities. And especially that we have a sense that the way that Islamophobia is increasing, anti-Semitism is increasing. So you're seeing this type of bonding between the Jewish community and the Muslim community. And when it comes to immigration, the way we talk about the Muslim ban, we're talking about another ban related to Latin American refugees or immigrants. So you're seeing that bonding as well between the Muslim community or Arab communities and Latin American communities. So you're seeing this type of political alliances forming themselves and rising above identity politics.
Fadi, I wanted to share a couple of experiences that we are seeing online from Arab Americans who are voting today. This is Shams Al-Badri, who says, shout out to the poll workers that are making this experience phenomenal for the first-time voters. Just took an Iraqi American family to vote. They were so excited. We took a family picture in front of their precinct map. Hashtag Yalla Vote, which means come on and vote. Another person, this is Widad, who says, quote unquote, Arabs don't vote, part 4. And they show a picture of 4 women in hijab or headscarves voting or having just voted. And then this last tweet here, Ms. Hala says, Mabruk, or congratulations to Rashida Tlaib. Inshallah, God willing, Ilhan from Minnesota will be the second voting matter. So I don't know, and I can't speak for Ilhan, of course, if she considers herself Arab. She is Somali American. Some of Somalia is Arab speaking. But Rashida, of course, definitely is Palestinian. It featured in some of her campaigning, and as part of her platform, it's who she is. What do you know about her campaign?
Well, let's start with this. The news was generating these headlines that when we talk about Rashida Tlaib, we're talking about the first Muslim woman elected to Congress or to the House of Representatives. But Rashida Tlaib does not frame herself as being only Muslim. That's not the dominant feature of her political life. She basically tries to present herself as a progressive candidate, defending issues related to social justice and environment and other issues. And the Democratic establishment didn't really want Rashida Tlaib. She was told, wait your turn. But she decided and she defied the establishment and went along and carried on with her candidacy. So in many ways, what we're seeing now is, let's have some kind of historical context. After 9/11, most Arabs were voting, or many Arabs were voting with the Republican Party. After 9/11, because they were labeled as terrorists, we saw some shift toward the Democratic Party in 2004. But mainly the Arabs and the Muslims in the US were in a defensive position because they had to prove their allegiance to this nation. They were not proactive. With Bernie Sanders, we started getting a sense of pride, especially when he started to formalize a solid foreign policy and talked in a different voice about Palestine and Palestinian statehood and Israeli occupation. You started to see this kind of enthusiasm. And in many ways, what we're seeing now is a proactive role that Arabs and Muslim Americans are playing. They're not just a voting bloc for the Democratic establishment. They have role models that they want to vote for, and they want to get to the office, whether in the Congress, federal, state, or local offices. And this is, the voters are identifying with these type of candidates. And that's why we're seeing this type of shift. The question is this now. Prior to this wave of progressive candidates, Arabs were labeled as, many Arabs and Muslims always had this label of terrorism hanging over their heads. Now, associating themselves with progressive politics will benefit them or harm them on the long run, because we know President Donald Trump labels the left and Democratic Party as being socialist, for example.
Right. Well, they're still making inroads, even if that label, to use your word, is problematic or has been in the past. So it certainly seems like the rhetoric around these issues is changing. I did want to share with our audience Rashad, an Arab American community organizer who tweets using the hashtag #MyArabVote and shared with us this video with the views of some young Arab voters, just like Rashida. Take a look at this. Oh, unfortunately,
I'll actually play it from my
Look at
laptop.
Malika saving me and the technique.
He tweeted it to us.
You should just go to Georgia and save their whole ballot system.
I don't know if I have that power.
Yeah.
But I have the power
Not
to
ballot, sorry, technology.
share Rashad's tweet here on what matters most. So take a look at my screen here, and I'll play it for you.
My name is Muhammad Ali, and I'm voting on November 6th.
My name is Peter, and I'm voting on November 6th.
My name is Ruby Abutalib, and I'm voting on November 6th. My name is Yasmin, and I'm voting on November 6th.
My name is Brian, and I'll be voting November 6th.
Hi, I'm Lulu, and I already voted by mail for this November 6th historical elections. Please vote.
My name is Ramsey, and I pledge to vote on November 6th.
My name is Rashad, and I pledge to vote on November 6th.
So to your point, Fadi, not just candidates more enthusiastic about participating, but it seems voters as well. Thanks, Fadi, for being with us and for your insights, as always. You can follow Fadi's reporting tonight on Al Jazeera Arabic. Now, this next topic is one that the stream has returned to again and again and again. Rightfully.
We love it.
Rightfully. People with disabilities say they are all too often left out of the political conversation. Back in 2016, in the run-up to the presidential election, a campaign called Crip the Vote, hashtag Crip the Vote, tried to change that. And those campaigners have stayed active since then, trying to push a conversation about disability rights up the political agenda.
I voted this midterm election because the stakes are too damn high for practically every marginalized community. Healthcare, reproductive rights, disability rights, immigration, they aren't separate issues for me. As a disabled woman of color, I'm exercising my right to vote, in addition to other forms of activism to create change. Voting isn't the answer to everything, but it's one way to make my voice heard.
The Crip the Vote campaign was created by Alice Wong, who you just saw there, Greg Baratan, and Andrew Polrang, and is aimed at helping to empower people with disabilities by turning a negative word on its head. I even cringe to say that phrase there, but that is what the aim is. Andrew here tweets, earlier this year, we did a 2-month hashtag Crip the Vote online survey asking which disability issues disabled people care about most. And you can see them here, top 5 topics: healthcare, civil rights discrimination, accessibility, housing, and benefits. Now, Dominic is an artist in Los Angeles, and he is on Instagram with that same hashtag saying, I voted whilst in transplant clinic with my mail-in ballot. No excuses. I voted for candidates that want to protect pre-existing conditions, the ACA, workers' rights, LGBTQI rights, and Black Lives Matter. And Wellness Rising also posted this on Instagram. Learn how to sign vote in American Sign Language while you wait in line to vote.
Joining us from Berkeley, California, Lawrence Carter Long is the Director of Communications for the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. Lawrence, thanks so much for being with us. Why is this such a key issue, and what about this year is different?
I think what's different about this year, well, let's go to the numbers, right? Figures released by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention just last August reported that adults with disabilities make up 61 million people. That's roughly 1 in 4, arguably the largest minority in the United States. That's increased since the last census. This is what Justin Dart, the father of the Americans with Disabilities Act, dubbed the hidden army. I think once the right to vote is met with the means to vote, and I'm talking independently and privately, then Americans with disabilities will finally be able to flex our political muscle as a serious force to be reckoned with. What makes this year different? This year is different, I think, because we've had it put in our face. Basically, every single issue that you've been talking about, what you showed in that poll, becomes more complicated, becomes compounded, becomes more difficult if you have a disability. What Crip the Vote has done is this social media insurrection, revved up growing dissent among disenfranchised disabled voters. And then advocacy groups like National Adapt capitalized on this energy by mobilizing their members to occupy offices of senators and representatives in Congress. That, in turn, stalled GOP attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And this literally kept healthcare issues alive until the rest of the nation could catch up. To paraphrase my colleague at the Center for American Progress, Rebecca Cook, if you or one of your family members use Medicaid, you owe disabled people a debt of gratitude. People are finally waking up to this fact.
I want to share this tweet that you tweeted not too long ago. Cheerfully doing my civic duty on Election Day, as guaranteed by Amendment, okay, so this is 10, 15, 16 of the United States Constitution, publicly asserting my right to complain if need be through the next election cycle. So there's a picture of Lawrence doing his civic duty there. I want to share a video comment from another former stream guest who also did their civic duty today. This is Heben, and this is what she had to say.
My name is Haben Girma.
I'm a disability rights lawyer. People with disabilities are the largest minority group. There are over 57 million Americans with disabilities. A lot of polling stations have barriers. We need to work to remove these barriers so that people who use wheelchairs, people who need assistive polling machines, everyone should have access to vote, to share our voice. I'm voting by mail. About half the states don't allow people to vote by mail. Let's work to remove these barriers.
My name is Melissa Thompson, and I voted absentee in South Carolina because I wanted to make sure that my voice was heard as a Black disabled woman. The issues that matter to me, such as reproductive rights, disability rights, healthcare, and education, are all on the line. And I wanted to do my part to elect officials that care about those issues, that will not work hard to reduce those rights, but will uphold those rights and enforce more policies that would give us greater opportunities to thrive and survive.
So both of those video commenters there and former stream guests, and also Lawrence a little bit earlier, mentioned healthcare, and yet it is not something that is in the headlines. At least it hasn't been in the last few weeks, even I dare say months. Where is it and why is that? Brad, Reno, do you want to weigh in there?
Well, it may not be in the headlines, but you're seeing the Dems that have won, and by the way, I think officially Dems have taken back the House.
They have.
They've run on healthcare, because this is the issue that Americans care the most about. And I think, I am so inspired by Crypto Vote. When working in the Obama White House, we had incredible disability advocates in our Office of Public Engagement. We actually mobilize and work with the disability community because of exactly what we just saw. The stories are so inspiring, and these issues are life or death, right? This isn't just abstract. This really does depend on whether a young person or a child can actually live. These policies have real life consequences. I think that, unfortunately, again, not to keep bashing Donald Trump, but that's the, sort of the moral of the story tonight. Trump has really attacked the disability community. He promised that he would protect pre-existing conditions, and yet his Congress tried to repeal Obamacare and tried to roll back pre-existing conditions. He also gutted Social Security disability insurance in his budget. So there's a reason why the disability advocates are fired up. There's a reason why they are mobilized, not just protesting, but also in getting their members out to vote. And I also agree that it's not just healthcare, right? It touches every issue, housing, education, transportation, all of these things matter. And so, we owe a debt of gratitude to the brave Crypto Vote advocates who put their lives on the line.
And Lauren, some of that work is what you were doing.
We've literally got nothing else to lose. Our lives are on the line here. You know, I think every one of those issues that you've been talking about tonight, that's sort of been flying under the radar, is a disability issue. Let's look at Florida. Everybody's talking about the gubernatorial race in Florida. Ballot Amendment 4 in Florida would restore the right to vote for those with prior felony convictions, right? That has passed. This will return voting rights to over 1 million, I think it's something like 1.4 million people. Many of those folks are disabled and or people of color. That race for governor in Florida would probably be a very different story right now if those people had the right to vote, right? So when we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about the Affordable Care Act, we're talking about Medicaid expansion. Let's look at it. It's been a ballot measure in 4 states right now. Idaho, Nebraska, Utah, Montana have added Medicaid expansion to their midterm ballots. This is going to determine eligibility for residents who earn up to 138% beyond federal poverty level. And it could increase 325,000 people to the Medicaid program. So in Montana, they're even voting if they're going to make a temporary expansion permanent, right? So you don't have to be into politics, as Andrew Rang said, to commit to full-time disability advocacy or recognize that elections matter for people with disabilities and their families, because this year in particular, there are specific stakes and reasons for all of us to vote and to do so consciously and thoroughly as disabled voters.
And I think it's not just for disabled voters, to your point, Lawrence. You outlined certain states where this is an appealing message. We look at Texas, even if O'Rourke didn't win there, as we discussed earlier, it seems like Texas is changing, and healthcare is part of that equation, despite immigration playing heavily there. And I bring this up Because it's not a coincidence, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. Trump's biggest lies are about immigration.
Sure.
His biggest fear-mongering is immigration because that's what his base is fired up about. He also, his second biggest lie, I would say, is about those weird pre-existing conditions that he magically now supports and the Republican Party supports. But the reason I bring this up is because when I went to Tennessee, I expected to have everybody fired up about immigration.
Right.
And I asked one question about it, and they gave me the answer, I don't want them to come here and take my jobs.
Yeah.
But then, without even asking a question about healthcare, every single person I spoke to brought up healthcare and then couldn't stop talking about it. So, to your point, it might not be in the headlines, but it's certainly in people's minds. And I just want to play a sample of some of those answers and come to you, Rena. Let's listen in.
We all worry about healthcare. I mean, everybody will tell you that probably.
Democrat and Republican.
Right, exactly.
Trump claims he's fighting hard against a plan by Democrats that would destroy Medicare.
I got Medicare.
Medicare?
Yeah.
And
it pays 79%, but
it's not too bad.
It could get better.
Yeah, Medicare. And you're not concerned at all that the Republicans might try and change Medicare coverage for people?
No, I don't think they will. It might improve it some.
In reality, the fund is suffering under his administration. In June, the government projected Medicare funds would be gone by 2026 due to low wages and lower taxes.
The number one issue to me is the health care. Like my daughter, she just had her new baby, but her struggle right now is trying to get insurance on that baby. That's taken from the food on the table.
And do you think people believe President Trump and other Republicans when they say we're going to protect your pre-existing conditions, even though it's actually the opposite of what they do?
Yeah, I think that it is. I think that they believe whatever any of the politicians say. Like I said before, they hear it, they see it, it's got to be true.
So Lawrence, I don't know if it makes any difference, but that last gentleman who was speaking was the mayor of this town in Tennessee, Jamestown, Tennessee. 82.5% of people in 2016 voted for President Trump. A lot of people disillusioned with his rhetoric, but everybody speaking about healthcare. And in fact, just a quick anecdote before I get your reaction to some of what you heard. He was appointed mayor a month ago because the former mayor died of cancer. And he's, one of 5 people in 3 days who kept bringing up cancer and wondering if cancer is something that's more prevalent in rural America than not. And healthcare was the #1 issue across the board in this town that would have been so susceptible to this hardline immigration message. Does that surprise you? And how can you work to help people like that who are as concerned about these issues but have a completely different reality than you?
I think what we've got to do is bring it home to them. When you stop and think about disability, the prevalence of disability, the incidence of disability in their lives, disability is found in every race, every ethnicity, every sexual orientation, all genders, every income level, every political persuasion. If you're lucky to live long enough, odds are one day you're going to be a member of the club. I think it's a growing constituency. Americans are just barely starting to wake up to this fact, and we need to start voting like it. I think that's what people need to understand. Where do issues like immigration and disability collide? They collide at something like the public charge that 45 that Donald Trump is proposing. With the public charge, they're saying that if you've ever been on public assistance, if you have a disability, if you have a pre-existing condition, which is code for disability, they're not even going to let you into the United States. Right. Groups like Rooted in Rights and Latinx, they've made videos about this issue. I'll tweet it out later for people to see. But every single issue that you're talking about, when it intersects with disability, it becomes compounded and it becomes more of a problem and it becomes more difficult.
I'm just looking at the hashtag Crypt the Vote here, pulled up one. This is from several hours ago, but Lawrence, I wanted to make sure that our audience knows about all the races, or as many as possible, of course, that are happening tonight. So this just in, remember this was about 6:56 p.m. Pacific time. Disabled Democratic gubernatorial candidate Billy Sutton doing better than many expected, currently ahead in South Dakota. You explain where your intel is from. You say thanks and hashtag Crypt the Vote. Do you know where that race is now?
I haven't seen the results since I got on with y'all, and I know that it was really close. It was just it's not even a percentage point. So I'd be curious to see. That's something I'll be looking at as soon as we're done here. I want to bring up one of the new trends that we're seeing is that more and more people with disabilities have been running for office. There's a group called the National Council on Independent Living. A woman named Sarah Blauvek has been doing an open access database both of office holders and of disabled candidates. And if people want to find out more about that, I think they should go to ncil.org, nickel.org, and look up that information. Both they've got elected officials and candidates with disabilities. And I think that's a trend we're going to be seeing increase as time goes on, because our issues continue to be ignored by the mainstream and mainstream politicians, and even, I think, the corporate media.
Lawrence, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. As always, Lawrence Carter-Long is the Director of Communications Disability at the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, coming to us from Los Angeles, California. I have to pause this part of our broadcast here, but I want to leave you with Al Jazeera English's coverage. We will be back to discuss the African American vote in a few minutes, but first, here's Al Jazeera English's live coverage.
So voter registration is a good example. Removal of individuals from a voter registration effectively means that they wouldn't be able to vote. You have to register to be able to vote. This could be a matter of suppression. You're trying to prevent people from voting. One of the reasons for these types of things, however, is to prevent voter fraud. So, for instance, in my own case is an anecdotal example. When I was younger, I was registered in the state of Indiana, then I moved to Texas. If I registered in Texas, technically I'm registered in 2 states, and if someone's not checking, I could theoretically vote in 2 elections at the same time. The question becomes, is this being done properly, or is this being done to remove, say, marginalized groups or something of this type? And this has become kind of a particularly strong issue between Democrats and Republicans. And part of it being that, so in the case of Kansas, it looks like the allegations are that he was involved in voter suppression. There was a case that came up, in memory serves, about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago in Texas of potential voter fraud, of basically voters being invented. In some ways, part of this is just partisan politics. In effect, it's a way of kind of getting the battlefield ready that if you win or lose, you could say, we didn't really lose. Our votes were suppressed, or voter fraud was involved. So on the Republican side, saying we are bringing in a group of illegal immigrants to illegal vote. That part of this is certainly ideological, but part of it is purely partisan in some ways. That has become more of an emphasis now. Just seems to be a matter of kind of saliency more than anything else. Has there been a big move towards voter suppression? Certainly there's been a change in terms of gerrymandering. So in terms of how districts are reworked inside the United States. The biggest difference being that after the 2010 census, and with many state legislatures going to the Republicans from that point forward, gerrymandering started moving in more of a Republican direction. Partisan gerrymandering has been going on at least since the 1820s, actually. How much of this is suppression and how much of this is just party politics is a good question. But it is certainly something that the Democrats have made a much greater emphasis in their discussions, probably in some ways to help try and motivate their base especially.
Yeah, and it's something that certainly we'll be looking at as this new crop of governors come in. They'll be trying to stop this process of gerrymandering. Philip, do stay with us. We will be coming back to you shortly. Just want to take this opportunity to go over to our social media producer, Leah Harding, because, Leah, this, of course, must be a top trend that we're seeing across the US and indeed maybe the world.
We're seeing tens of millions of tweets with hashtags like I voted, midterm 2018, and just simply hashtag vote. People literally all around the world are talking about this election, especially young people. Now, people are tweeting their shock as well, the good and the bad kind, about how this election has been playing out, especially when it comes to the female candidates. There's lots of excitement for the youngest woman to be elected to Congress, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She'll represent New York, and she's just 29 years old. Democrat Ayanna Pressley, she becomes the first black woman to represent Massachusetts, and Democrat Sharice Davids is the first Native American woman to serve in Congress and the first openly LGBT person to represent Kansas. One man tweeted saying, I don't care what your politics are, it's refreshing and exciting to see our nation embrace diversity. Now, people have been posting on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, sharing pictures of themselves with their famed I voted stickers. As usual, celebrities are also using their influence to support candidates, but no one has had an impact quite like singer Taylor Swift.
Good morning, America. It's Taylor. I just wanted to say
Swift has 112 million followers on Instagram and has asked all of them to vote. Just to put that into perspective, the White House only has 4 million followers. And according to a polling site called Target Smart, there's been a 767% increase in young voters compared to 2014. Many are calling it the Swift effect.
And again, once you voted, take a picture of it, tag me in your photo, #JustVoted, and I'll be looking for you. Happy voting, you guys.
Like Taylor, we've also been asking you to send us your election thoughts. Here's what some of you had to say.
My reasoning for voting is that I would like to change the wrongdoings of this country. And one of the only ways I feel I can do that is if I let my voice be heard through my vote.
A lot of people walking around with I voted stickers on. So maybe that's some circumstantial evidence, but it seems like a lot of people have been going out and getting their votes in today, and people seem to be proudly wearing those stickers today.
As you can imagine, social media has been pivotal in this election, and Twitter and Facebook know it. Twitter blocked over 10,000 accounts that were being used to discourage voting. Facebook says it's blocked 30 accounts and 85 accounts on Instagram. That's hardly anything, though, really, compared to the millions of accounts that were deleted for spreading misinformation in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Now, we also want to hear from you. If you voted, send us a video telling us what issues were most important to you. You can send it to me on Twitter. My name there is at Leah Harding AJE. We'll continue to monitor the conversation online. But for now, back to you.
Leah, thanks very much. Let's go live now to John Hendren. He's been standing by for us in Indianapolis. We did see one House seat in Missouri, John, that I know you were talking about earlier. It feels like a long time ago, but it was probably only in the last hour. So much has happened. Claire McCaskill, she was running for the Democrats. I just wanted to get an update on how she's faring.
McCaskill is not faring well. She was trailing, and so has, of course, the man who we were here to see today, Joe Donnelly. This pretty much says it all. If you can just take a look. The bar is closed. The podium is empty. Every last celebrant is gone. There are just a couple of journalists here. This was supposed to be a celebration for Joe Donnelly. A number of Democrats were here as well. It was a statewide party. Some of them did win, but this was the big race they had really hoped for, and they wanted him to be at the crest of this Democratic wave, which in the Senate does not appear to have happened. And not only that, when he lost his seat, he actually set the Democrats back a bit. And I just got a text from a political science professor who said he thinks he understands why this happened. Donnelly was a Democrat in a Republican state, and he bashed the left. He said he wasn't like those crazy Democrats. He supported Trump's border wall. He quoted Ronald Reagan. He was pro-life.
No Republican president has ever won the black vote in either a presidential or a midterm election. And while that will not change tonight, the black vote could prove crucial. Several political analysts say that a high turnout among black voters may be what reverses the balance of power in Congress. We're going to talk about that with our guest shortly. But first, take a look at this. We went to Washington, D.C.'s historically black Howard University a few days ago, and here's what some people there told us.
Voting is very important to the black community because, as a lot of people should know, we weren't allowed to vote at a certain point in time.
A lot of us weren't able to get to the voting polls, and when we were at the voting polls, it took hours.
We're pretty much underserved in pretty much every area of government and pretty much every area of society.
With Obama's election in 2008, black people had one of the highest voting turnout in centuries, and going forward from there, I mean, you just saw that shift during Trump's time. So with that, black people have to vote, we have to get out, and we also know the importance of it, and if our vote wasn't important, they wouldn't try to take it away from us so much.
Well, here with us on set to get into all of that and more, Kwame Rose is an activist and writer. Thank you so much for coming to set this late at night.
Thank you for having me.
To talk about this issue, one that is near and dear to my heart, probably because I'm black, but also because I'm an American and it matters. So I want to share with you some happy news if this is your party, perhaps, or if you care about history. This is via AJ+. Ayanna Pressley is now Massachusetts' first black woman elected to Congress. You can see her there. What do you make of what we have seen thus far tonight, Kwame?
Well, first off, congratulations to Ayanna Pressley for being the first black woman. It's amazing that we have to say that in 2018. But I think once again, for the second straight election, what we've seen across the country is a major failure by the Democratic Party to center their agenda on black issues. We see what happened in the race in Texas, where Beto was beat by Ted Cruz because over 50% of white women decided to go with Ted Cruz, as opposed to voting in the interest of their a little more seasoned sisters voting for Beto. And what the Democratic Party has consistently failed to do, right? They'll produce black faces, but when it comes to addressing actual issues and tangible things to the community, they consistently have failed, right? After Obama, we got this big, we got this image of that the Democratic Party was finally turning the corner, and then all these white liberals got scared when Trump was in president. Trump hasn't changed anything. In fact, he's given an agenda to the people who were silenced by their white moderate cousins. And Democrats have failed to rebound from Trump becoming president, and they failed to find a new path as a way to galvanize more black voters. I can tell you today, I didn't vote for governor in Baltimore because the Democratic Party, as a black person in Maryland, where Democrats outweigh Republicans 2-1, did not give me anything to vote for that they would operate in the best interest of me and my community.
Before we entered into the segment in the break there, I want to share with our audience, there was a little exchange between Brad, Democratic strategist here on set, and Kwame, who had just sat down. Relay for our audience what you said, Brad, and then what your response was, Kwame. So you were saying that there's some good things happening tonight.
There's some good things. Well, look, I said this earlier, and you guys laughed at me, but I am the eternal optimist. That's why everyone hates me, because I'm the guy who's like, it's going to be okay. But, look, I think that from the congressional side, and we're looking at the projections here, if you care at the federal level of keeping Donald Trump and this Republican Congress, the trifecta of having a president, a Congress, a Senate, and a House, and a Supreme Court, Democrats made huge gains in the House. I think, to your point, what does that mean? How does that translate? And particularly, I agree with you, particularly for younger black voters, right? Which is, again, I think that there's this vicious cycle of Democrats not investing, to your point, in actually reaching and communicating with that voting bloc, because they say, well, they never vote anyway. So there's this vicious cycle of we're not going to invest because they don't vote. I agree. I think that if the Democratic Party, and I would say this for a range of different constituencies, right? Latino vote as well. Andrew Gillum was so close. Stacey is so close.
No, not according to the results.
Yeah.
Well, no, Gillum is very close.
I'm talking about Stacey.
Oh, Stacey.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. I mean, look, there's still like 10% left unreported.
Right.
She's, 5 or 6 points out. But Georgia's a very tough state to win, and the fact that she was able to make such gains, and the fact that, the black vote actually did come out in historic numbers. Granted, it's not saying much because there hasn't been much to report on. But the black vote, the non-white vote came out in historic numbers, but there's still so much more to be done.
It seems like we have an optimist and a pragmatist. You seem to be pretty realistic to me, Kwame. I just met you, but what does this mean on the positive side in general with the Democrats taking the House? Maybe that can serve your community in terms of investigate. No, you give me that look. You give me that look like, what is this guy talking about? Why not? Why don't you think that even just that small win of Democrats taking the House, or maybe I should ask you, do you think that the fact that Democrats taking the House will serve a community like yours?
No, so this is the issue, right? The Democratic Party spent this entire election season being anti-Trump, as opposed to addressing the fact that Trump has reignited white supremacy rhetoric, which has now turned into homegrown terrorist acts. We saw 3 of them in the last 2 weeks.
True that.
And so is this a positive gain? Not at all.
Cumulatively, or what would have happened if the House and the Senate remained in the Republican control for your community in the next
What's
year?
happened in the last 2 years of Trump's presidency?
I hear you.
Absolutely nothing. Right? So we're not doing anything to stop. All the House is going to do is investigate Trump for what we know he may or may not have done. Right?
Well,
Donald Trump releasing his tax returns does not make me safer.
But the GOP
does not give people any access to free education or opportunity.
Yeah.
The GOP, the first thing they were going to do was going to repeal Obamacare. If Republicans stayed in power, and that was going to affect millions of black families. Millions of black families
whose
children...
It would affect me. I appreciate my parents' health care.
Exactly. Millions of black families whose children rely on these protections against pre-existing conditions and a range of other things. I agree. Look, I'm someone who we can always do more, but having a check on this fool, having a check on this authoritarian is a net positive, right?
Not in 2018, right? Because the case in point should be this. In 2018, someone who uses the rhetoric and the language that Donald Trump uses should have never had an obsolete chance to become president.
He is, though. I mean, this is the reality.
Is that, right? So, sure, historic numbers of Latinos, historic numbers of black voters, historic number of minorities can vote. We need white people to finally step up. Dr. King said the biggest threat to the black community is not the white supremacist. It is the white moderate who is more dedicated to order rather than justice.
The one thing, again, to be the optimist, the way that the Democrats won these districts, they're about to pick up 35 seats, was suburban white people. It's high college educated, suburban districts. These are women who went for Trump. A few of them didn't go for Trump in these suburban districts. So again, look, I'm all about incremental, right? And I'm all about the net positive. At the end of the day,
look, it's been 400 years since we've been in this country.
Yeah, it's a long
and this incremental
road.
gain has not closed the wealth gap one bit.
The incremental,
I'm going to pause you just right there, because I wanted to share some news and a few comments from our community. So we were talking about Stacey Abrams, whether you want to be an optimist or a pessimist. Take a look here. You can decide for yourself. 2018 Georgia gubernatorial election results. This is as of 11:59 p.m., which is right now. 52.7% for Brian Kemp, the Republican, and 46.4% for Stacey Abrams. So we will see. That's with 92% reporting, though. So keep that in mind. Moving over here to Twitter. This is Zerlina Maxwell, who gives us a little taste of some of the frustration some people may feel with the coverage of this election. And here it is. She says, "This is the whitest tweet ever sent." And that tweet is, "Elections are important, but no matter who wins, 99.999% of your daily life and existence will be completely unaffected by the results." Just a bit of perspective. So AJ Nottingham says right here, "Every time I hear someone nonchalantly say that they are tired of the campaign and the ads, all I can think of is that they have no clue how serious this really is and what it means, especially for me as a woman and as a person of color. #Black votes matter." Kwame.
No hashtag privilege.
Of course, we all have a little bit of privilege in our ways, but Kwame, this bigger point here is that there have been a lot of headlines, pontification, analysis that erases a segment of voters, and doesn't take into account that perspective here, that there is a community that will be detrimentally affected no matter what happens.
And I do want to point out, tonight in Florida, 1.4 million former felons will now, who are predominantly black and brown people, will now have their rights restored. However, I'm sick and tired of saying you have to vote. The Democratic Party isn't giving me anything to vote for. I don't got to do nothing but stay black and die. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to happen either way. Michael Eric Dyson made a very good point. He said, if you look at it, most black people would vote Republican if the Republicans weren't racist. So we get the voters and we get the voting rights restored in Florida, but yet a governor, who I'm not going to name because he is a racist, who called a black man in 2018 a monkey, is now has won.
You don't have to name him because we already did earlier. Earlier in the broadcast, we already named him. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just like trying to, process all this, I guess, because I'm grateful to black women because they saved us from having a pedophile in the Senate with Roy Moore in Alabama.
But we got a sexual abuser in the White House.
That was pretty crazy to me. The fact that it was like, that's what it took, and that's why we have Doug Jones. That's a good thing. I feel like black women are being valued, and finally there's some value for what they bring and how they're reliably a voting bloc that seems to save everything all the time. I don't know. I mean, that's just my thing.
Do the way your Republican Party? Do you hear the way Donald Trump talks about Maxine Waters?
Absolutely despicable.
So it doesn't matter if Doug Jones is in office and he's a child abuser and a molester. We got a guy who said grab her by the you know what, and he's in office, and still 55% of white women are siding with this guy.
For sure. It's disappointing.
Colin Kaepernick can't get a job, and he's probably the most qualified. This is about having the most qualified candidate, not a popularity contest who speaks to our racist, silent issues.
Indeed.
And the problem is that the Republican Party continuously uses a few minorities who boast their opinions. This is more than about career opportunities. This is about the lives of millions of people who are affected by these racist ideologies.
My black and brown friends who've gone all in for Trump while I've stayed on the never Trump fringes, I mean, they disappoint me every day because to me, they are part of the problem. If you were going to enter and not be honest, an honest broker about the change we need, and you're just going to kowtow to, the standard bearer of the party, then it doesn't do anything. But me leaving the party would not help. When we are ready to have a conversation about rebuilding a party, we cannot have, for example, as a woman, gender parity without political parity first, right? So if I leave the party and just because I don't agree with this guy, I can't work towards the change we all need.
You can. You know why? Because it's not enough to be anti-racist. It's not enough to be anti-homophobic. You have to spend your every day of your existence deconstructing these institutions and these systems of oppression that no matter who is the head of, there's a party that is specifically trying to revoke the rights of transgender people. And there is a party that has galvanized support and is now on the bandwagon of Trump, who came and co-opted that party's agenda.
He took the party over.
Right.
And so it is about leaving the party. Because sometimes we have to make bold choices.
I do.
Because if you leave, how many
Where do I
percent
go?
of white...
This country does not have an appetite for a centrist movement. I worked on a 2016 independent presidential...
Because too many people are scared to do anything.
Too many people are scared to leave.
It's not about that. The appetite is not there for an independent centrist movement yet. People are too much on the left and on the right.
But who's going to start that if not you?
Well, I mean, I tried it.
I went
into the country, gave up my life for 4 months.
The reason I'm being hypothetical about it, though, is because when I went to Tennessee, like I told you, which is all I'm talking about tonight, it blew my mind being in rural Tennessee. And the reason is because I was expecting a certain thing, and what I got was Melissa Hicks, a chicken farmer, has been down and out for 26 years, living in Jamestown, and she starts talking about Bernie Sanders and universal health care and how she didn't vote for the Republicans or the Democrats. She had a choice.
I grew up in the coal fields of West Virginia where I didn't even realize my color, as I was talking with Brad earlier. I mean, we were just American. There were black, brown, everybody together. But that was the 80s and 90s.
That place don't exist
anymore. No, it's not that anymore because when jobs leave and people feel that white men feel forgotten because work has changed and they felt opportunities left them.
Because
and so there's a blame
they don't
game.
get to openly oppress people of color.
Yeah, that is the truth.
Nobody, unless you're white, you have no chance or
fight
opportunity in America to ever forget your color.
As
I
a
grew up a
brown woman,
middle
I get it, my
class.
friend,
I grew up a middle
definitely.
class black kid,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Going to private school. I was called a nigger in private school. Right? I never got to forget that I was black because my parents, when they bought their house, the white neighbors wanted to know how did they be able to afford a place in this neighborhood.
And when I dated a white guy, I got called exotic. And it was like one of those things, right? It's not the same thing at all, but we all have our things. I'm definitely not trying to equate that to living in the neighborhood thing.
But I don't want minorities making excuses for white America. White America has not done.
I can't tell you I make excuses, but
I've heard nothing but excuses.
Incremental. I cannot leave a party that is like, it's just going to combust, right? And then suddenly it's just a white party, right?
I'm from Baltimore, right?
Yeah.
People are dying every day. I lost 3 people I knew last week, right? Because of institutions of racial oppression that have existed. Change cannot be incremental.
Well, let me tell you something positive.
I need change today, and I need it now.
I'm with you, my friend. And so what I did in January, I got with 2 other sort of anti-Trump women, and we created something called Women's Public Leadership Network as a way to build a pipeline for principled leadership, women who are leaving the Republican Party in droves that we did not learn about until today. The empirical evidence came today. Yeah. But we started in January. We got funding from the Democracy Fund. We were women that said we don't want to leave, but we want to build a pipeline of principled leadership. And as a nonpartisan nonprofit, we can do that. And we do partner with groups like Higher Heights, which is dedicated to getting more black women into public office as well. And I think this is all we have to do. That's what we do. We change the systems a little bit. We equip our people differently.
You guys aren't saying very different things. You're just saying that there needs to be more change faster, and what's happened today is not enough change for him and his community. And I don't want to digress because that was fascinating to watch you guys discuss that. But I do want to ask, when it comes to Florida and some of what you were outlining, Kwame, I mean, we have this tweet from Heather McGee. It's interesting. She says, remember, Dem campaigns in Florida have had to fight missing 18% of black voters, including Andrew Gillum this year, thanks to Amendment 4 that ends now. Now, that does end in Florida, but what does this suggest to you? I mean, that's almost, I think, 40% of the black population in Florida. You know, when we talk about these numbers and the disproportionate number of incarcerations. Is this encouraging for you? Is this hope in terms of incremental change, in terms of the next election 2 years from now and what could happen in Florida or elsewhere in this country?
No, I think what will happen is the Democratic Party will use this as a celebratory factor on a really somber night. But all you have is 1.4 potential voters. You still have to give them something to vote for. And like I said, we've been recreating this will of vote because our ancestors didn't have the right. And they gave their lives. They know black people give their lives for the right to vote. They were killed on the way to vote. So let's be honest about that.
Right.
Amendment 4 should have been repealed, right? Because we know the history. When slavery ended, there was mass incarceration. The 13th Amendment says slavery of another human being should not be allowed except for the punishment of a crime. And historically, black and brown people have been punished for crimes that white people have been getting away with for a long time.
What's your biggest criticism then for the party?
Stop marching celebrities around and start marching opportunity around. Because we saw what happened in Florida. We saw what happened in Georgia. We see what happened in Maryland, where Dave Chappelle's been campaigning with Ben Jealous, Oprah campaigning with Stacey Abrams, and every celebrity's campaigning with Beto and Gilliam. It don't work. We're not dumb. We got social media. We're more attached to celebrities than we've ever been. We don't need to come to a campaign rally to do that.
So I want to pick up on what you're saying there, because we got a comment from a member of our community and a former Stream guest who talks about what needs to happen next. This is Clifton. Here's what he told the Stream.
I'm Clifton Kinney, and I'm a Ferguson protester. This election matters because while voting has never been and will never be enough, young people in my generation, Generation Z, have an opportunity to transform our society. We have to build a mass movement, you all. This movement has to ensure that young people have access to food, healthcare, education, and housing. We have to figure out how to meet the needs of the most vulnerable, and voting is a part of that process.
So Kwame, I want your thoughts on how we build a mass movement, but keep in mind that there are still large swaths of the country that do not believe that black lives matter. Where do you go? How do you start?
Cliff is a good friend of mine, but what has to happen is we have to start investing in independent black institutions, independent Latino institutions, right? We have to start from the ground up, essentially, because we see these white-led organizations do not represent the best interest of the most oppressed people in this country. And so you start building mass movements by investing in small communities, small organizations, and small institutions where they have control over what happens in their community.
Are you encouraged, and I know this segment is obviously about Black Lives Mattering, but it's to your points, I mean, it's Brown Lives Mattering, it's, you know, Latinos and other groups, and that's where you've seen a lot of unity, and I think a lot of progress when it comes to pressuring the Democratic narrative. I'm just curious, when you see these small gains, the first Muslim elected here, first woman, you know, what was it? I'm sorry.
Deb Haaland, first Native American.
Native Americans, people who are non-white. Just with you talking about what needs to happen, does that encourage you, even on a small step?
I love how you're like trying to find something.
But there's a reason. There's a reason why I'm trying to find something, because I think not enough people speak like you speak about the Democratic Party and criticizing its shortcomings, if you will.
Sure.
That said, I'm wondering where you can start to build some of what you're outlining beyond the celebrities. Where do we actually? Because for me, when I don't think I'm an eternal optimist, but I'm always looking for hope. So do you see hope in those small victories? In Texas, the first 2 Latinas. Sure, you could say in Texas, it's crazy that it's 2018 and that's the first time you have 2 Latinas. But what do you think can be done with those small gains across the nation?
I applaud those gains, right? I applaud those women who have now become the first of their community. But what has to happen, right, is that Black people have been in America for 400 years. Until we address the oppression of the group that essentially gave 400 years of free labor.
But don't those people in those positions help increase the likeliness that we will address that? Because they may not be Black, But they know what it's like to not be white in America.
But there's a big difference, right?
Of course there is.
There's a difference for being a descendant of an African slave and being looked down upon than it is being any other minority in this country.
I agree, but there are also similarities.
But there are similarities.
So it's about which you want
but
to
there's
focus
still
on.
a big distinction,
100%.
right? In Maryland, we have not had a black governor in a very democratic state, right? Ever in history.
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
So we celebrate those gains, but we celebrate it not, and remember that we still haven't won.
Yeah.
So we win in small battles, but we still are fighting, and I hate to use this extreme word, but there's still a war for inclusion and opportunity in this country that if we put Band-Aids over by celebrating small wins that we just gained, the Democratic Party invest all their money or the Republicans just give us, then we lose sight of the point. And the point is to end oppression of all people.
Yeah.
You have to start at the root of what that oppression started with.
But there are really, really young people
you want to start with the
looking at
root. It's Native Americans, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
In this country.
Yeah, I mean,
you're saying it's black people before the others. I'm countering your point by saying, what about the Native Americans and Deb Haaland?
Of course, it is not an oppression Olympics, and so I don't.
I'm not trying to make it, but I'm just saying, that's why it matters.
Everyone on this table is oppressed in some way. I will say that. So I want to bring in here because you mentioned that Maryland does not have or has not had a black governor, still won't. Take a look here. This is via Google. 2018 Maryland gubernatorial election results. Larry Hogan is projected to win, and that is, of course, the Republican. There you see it, 56.5%. Ben Jealous, there, the African-American candidate, 42.5%, and that is with 97% reporting. You come to us from Baltimore, and of course, Baltimore has been in the news and is in the news many times for not so good reasons. What in Baltimore, not to pick up on this theme of hope, because we know that there's so much there. There is lead poisoning, there is dirty and corrupt policing, there are lots of bad stories there. What is happening there that keeps you going?
Well, so I think that a lot of times we talk about the bad of urban cities, but what you don't always talk about is the excellence that takes place and what keeps those cities and gives that vibrant culture. I know there are a lot of people, young people like myself from Baltimore City that are doing tremendous and great work in Baltimore to make sure that we change the current of what is deemed acceptable, what is deemed cool, and what is deemed as normalcy. And so we are doing a lot of great works. You have a lot of groups that are working in Baltimore City so to show young people that it is okay to wear a suit and talk about politics and affect change. It is okay to step outside the box. You have a lot of young people in Baltimore who are born in poverty, who never leave 5 blocks of their house their entire life, where they're born at, okay? And so what we're doing is changing the trend, we're changing the culture, and representation matters. Because if we don't give young people anything to look up to, if they don't see themselves as somebody in 5 to 10 years who they can be at, we lose lives.
Yeah.
We will continue, of course, to keep an eye on not only Kwame's work, but on what's happened in Baltimore, of course, Black Lives Matter, and hashtag the movement as a whole here at the stream, and of course, at AJ+. It is hard to believe it, though, but we are just about at the end of our broadcast tonight, so I have to thank Kwame for coming, for spending the very end, no, the morning, for spending the morning with us. It is 12:16 a.m. We've been live with you for about 3 hours, and we feel fresh. This has been a great conversation, but Kwame, thank you so much for joining us. Back with us now is Rob Reynolds. 3 hours later, Rob started this with us, and he is going to wrap up the night for us. You'll see him crisscross with Kwame there. I want to go to my computer here because, of course, if you've been following this night, you have been following our coverage, but you've also been following the coverage on what's actually happening, who's winning the races. So take a look here. This is the Google election results. 2018 election results updated as of 12:16 a.m. Republican Party, 51% seats so far. Democratic Party, 42%. And other parties, 1% there. And that is 94 of 100 seats declared in the Senate. And take a look here. This is the House. Democratic Party, 179. That's 41.1%. And Republican Party is 169, 38.9%. Rob Reynolds, welcome back. Help us break this down. What have you seen over the past 3 hours? Well, we've been chit-chatting about all kinds of issues that people are voting on.
Great discussion.
Great, it has been a great discussion.
The last few minutes of it. But
what has been happening in the United States?
The people have spoken. They've rendered kind of a split decision, if you will, and really as expected, the House has gone to the Democratic Party. We saw the Speaker to be again, Nancy Pelosi, celebrate. And we saw the House go to the Democrats and the Senate go quite narrowly in many narrow races to the Republicans. Republican will maintain control. There's a couple of things that were really unusual. In the state of Mississippi, there will be a runoff between Mike Espy, who is an African-American veteran politician, and his Republican opponent, because neither reached 50%. In the state of Florida, very important for voting rights, the more than, I think, about 1.3 million ex-felons are having their voting rights restored. So these are a couple of sort of highlights,
right.
you know, the sidelights, things that we'll have to sift through a lot. There's still a lot of votes to be counted in places like Arizona, so we don't know the Senate outcome there, or in Nevada. We know that there are a lot of House races in California that could also increase the Democratic majority there, but I think that I was just reading the LA Times, my hometown newspaper, described the results tonight as a stunning rebuke to President Trump.
Policies. Interesting. Ahmed.
Yeah, you know, I think I'm zoning out because I'm a little bit tired, and by zoning out, I mean not of this conversation, but of the online chatter. I mean, there's people on both sides of this trying to advance, I think, a narrative based on the results, and that's what happens in elections, right? And just hearing you outline that, I'm curious for your thoughts. I mean, if you look, I don't want to be too optimistic now after Kwame was just with us, because, you know, you got to be a bit realistic as well about what this suggests for America's trajectory. But it seems to me that there is a women insurgency, or whatever you want to call it. Women leading on the front lines for let's say, progressive values. And I wonder if that means we are more polarized now, because from what I've heard and from what I've gathered, it seems like moderate Republicans lost. And the places where the Republicans won is where Trump, who I think is as extreme as Republicans get, is really popular.
Sure.
What do you think of that kind of framing?
It's the reality we live in. I mean, I 100% agree, this was a rebuke of Trump. In the places where Democrats could even compete.
Mostly by women, right?
Mostly by women. And I think the other big thing we have not talked, we talked about pretty much everything tonight, but the one thing we did not talk about is gerrymandering, right? I mean, Democrats will probably end up, if you take a look at the House popular vote, 7-8 points more than Republicans. They should have won way more seats than the number of seats that they're winning, largely because of gerrymandered districts. You know, in a state like Texas, there's really only 2 or 3 competitive districts, whereas a state like Pennsylvania, because of the court case and the court commission reapportion of those districts, Democrats are going to pick up 6-7 seats because those are much more fair maps. So, you know, again, I think that it is, to your point, it is where, you know, Democrats had a chance, where there was a chance to talk to people, rational people on both sides, they won. But in states where Trump could just ratchet it up, play to his base, he won big. I mean, in these Senate races, he won very big, unfortunately.
I'm hearing what you're saying there, and I pulled up this tweet here because I think it's interesting. This is via the Washington Post, and they write, breaking, Democrats have secured a House majority, ending 2 years of complete GOP control in Congress and setting up battles with Trump. So it's that last part there that I'm interested in. Rena, the setting up the battles with Trump, I mean, it seems like it's history repeating itself. Of course, it's always just a new player right there. But what do you see those hemajor battles being?
The battles with Trump, my goodness, where do we begin? Of course, immigration, more than anything else. Healthcare, there's obviously going to be some talk again of really what Republicans tried to do was gut the ACA, and you know, it didn't work all this time. But you know, more than anything else, I think I have to tell you how shell-shocked I am. This is not good. This is not a good night for America.
Why?
This is a Congress, at least, we're very divided.
More
Tonight's
polarized?
yes, absolutely. As somebody who has been a moderate went back into the Republican Party as an agent of change after working on an independent presidential campaign. Going into the country, having spent lots of time talking to Americans, I thought we were better than this. I am always and will remain a believer that more women equal a stronger democracy. We're so underrepresented in this government. Under 20% of Congress until tonight was female. So this was really good news on that front. I would say history was made in over 100 women being elected tonight. That's all fine and well. But what does this represent? It means that Republicans in Congress are incredibly, incredibly loyal to Trump. That is so bad.
Well, and the sad thing, these districts where a lot of your friends lost, these are Republicans who tried to distance themselves from Trump. They did everything that they could not to tie themselves to Trump, but it's impossible. You can't, I mean, this is a person who, I mean, we can talk all about, you know, unique factors of Donald Trump, but he is the Republican Party, whether you like it or not.
I'm a former Hill staffer. Anything that got done on Capitol Hill that I witnessed meant that people had to come and meet in the middle. And this just means that compromise is going to be so hard to achieve.
You know what I feel is something that might not be worth mentioning, and so I'll just say it really quickly, but it's the worst way to preface any sort of point. But it's 12:23. We're about to wrap up, and Malika's going to really
and I'm going to go cry into my
take it
pillow
away.
tonight.
No, but as you were both speaking, and you say this is a more polarized America, this is a bad day for America, and something that really stood out of these 3 hours, actually, in fact, I would argue maybe the only thing is, where you talked about media and the media's role, and Loita talked about the media's role, because you think about the Democrats and the Republicans, is it really, no, to me it's Fox News and MSNBC.
100%.
That's
100%.
what America is. Because if you think about why those moderates lost, like you're saying it's because they couldn't get away, they tried to distance themselves from Trump, you have that loop cycle of Fox News and then Trump, and then Fox News, and then Trump. And so I don't know.
But it's a disrespect.
If you want to talk about battles that are setting up and about the increased polarization, now all of these House committees will change hands. Adam Schiff will be the new head of the Intelligence Committee. Gerald Nadler, who was a specialist in impeachment law and other things, will be in charge of the Judiciary Committee. So there will be a snowstorm of subpoenas, a flurry of investigations that will go on and sap a lot of the energy of this administration. But the president may also use that in a kind of jujitsu to say, look, they're out to get me. And of course, you know, the elephant in the room is Bob Mueller with his investigation.
So I wanted to bring in one comment. This via YouTube Live. Daniel says, I expect an escalation of the fear-mongering rhetoric and the divide. So really echoing what some of you are saying here. But I wanted to give you this tweet, Rob. This is from H.D. Flores, who says, if there isn't as much of a blue wave as Democrats were hoping for, is this a failure of the Democratic Party or a success of Republican counter-campaign? Earlier, of course, we did talk about it not being a tsunami, maybe there being a projection of a blue wave. What do you think we are seeing now that we are a few hours out?
I think we're seeing, as we've been saying, a stark division in the country. We're seeing a division between urban areas, now even more so suburban areas that have flipped from Republican to Democratic. We're seeing groups divided along ethnic, racial, educational, and economic lines. So it is a more divided country, probably, as you're saying, more polarized.
We can't understand each other when we're this divided. We can't understand why people make the decisions they do. And that just does not help with getting the policies we need that serve all Americans crafted. It just doesn't.
I mean, this conversation begs the question, though, and I'll give the credit, though, to H.G. Flores, because I think that's what he was asking. Where does the blame lie? It doesn't just happen. We don't just become divided.
It's within us. It's up to us to listen to one another and be committed to principled leadership that doesn't sell out to special interests. Young Republicans are changing their minds about the influence of money in elections, and they are changing their minds about gerrymandering. But sometimes my friends on the left don't want to hear that. And I find that very disturbing.
I think, look, I mean, here's the thing. I'll just be
Not
brutally
you,
honest. No. You're not gonna. You're not gonna get it when you have a president who's tweeting horseface at people, right? Like this is just when we ask why are we so divided. I mean, this is a chief divider. I mean, that is his job every day is to ratchet up his base and to demonize and bully those that don't agree with him. You can't have a country that can come together when you have a president who every single day he's figuring out a way to separate us.
So we got to push back on him because I always said that resist is not a winning electoral strategy.
But the Republicans have, at large,
they
failed. Democrats have
agree.
failed at many things, but it is almost, forget shameful and passing adjectives to it. It's surprising the lack of backbone. Look at Paul Ryan.
There's been no accountability.
No, zero.
It's
No
because there are
transparency,
comfy K Street
accountability, to
jobs.
Rob's point.
There are comfy K Street jobs for a lot
Fair
of
enough.
lawmakers, right? And so that's why younger people are changing their minds. And I'm not, again, not to sound ageist, because I have learned so much from really rich intergenerational relationships that I've had with older women that have been there, done that. Then I called an election 2016 and was just like so sad, worse than this. And they assured me that, you know, the pendulum always swings back. And so I am just so excited about what technology can do, what we can do as young people about bridging these divides. It's going to take time, but it's going to mean we do this piece by piece and we push back on a president that's trying to divide us from the top, and we just sort of promote it within ourselves. And we just say to ourselves, we agree on more than we disagree
Rob?
As probably definitely the oldest person in the room by far.
That camera operator might give you a run for your money.
I just want to say, if you thought that this election was divisive and emotional and intense, just wait for 2020. And
it's gonna be ugly.
that campaign has just started.
Exactly. Looking at his watch right there. So
On that
is
Brett.
that is exactly.
More coffee? Anyone?
More tears in my
We will be with you to cover that campaign as it starts. Of course, here on the stream and at AJ Plus. I want to leave you with two things before Ahmed wraps us up here. This is Google election results. Of course, you can go to google.com and find them here. They're updating it live, the Senate and the House. And of course, going to give a little plug to our friends on the web at aljazeera.com. Democrats flip the House, Republicans hold on to the Senate, and of course the live coverage is there on your screen, aljazeera.com. You can get that there as well. And of course our guests, you can find them on Twitter. Right, Ahmed?
Right. And for what it's worth, since everyone wants to go to bed, my money is on young women to help lead the future based on this election. It's just a little anecdote.
I'll take it.
How young?
I like that. That's a good one to close on.
I gotta say, you got a white man who's dividing America, and I don't want to inject race into this, but I think my perception, and maybe it's based on my own identity, which could be true, is that young women of color are fed up with not just President Trump, but I would argue even within the Republican Party, like yourself.
Absolutely.
There you go, our
we're
young
ready.
millennial. Anyway, I'm going to keep talking, so I'm going to stop. Thanks for watching and bearing with me, Malika.
Of course.
And letting me come back to the
Thank you
stream.
for bearing with us all 3 hours. Thanks so much for being on our stream.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed our first joint collaboration, and we'll see you online. Yeah.